The Sumerians wrote about the moon before they wrote about kings, before they wrote about war, before they wrote about grain or gold or the boundaries of their own cities. On the oldest clay tablets we have ever pulled out of the ground in southern Iraq, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than any culture we usually give credit to, the moon is already there. Not as a symbol, not as a poem, as a person, as a presence, as something that had shown up, taken a name, and started giving instructions. They called him Nanna. Later they called him Sin. And what they wrote about him, in the 10 records we are going to walk through tonight, does not sound like the mythology of a young civilization trying to explain the night sky. It sounds like the field notes of witnesses. It sounds like a report. It sounds like 10 different scribes, in 10 different centuries, in 10 different cities, all describing the same visitor and trying to make sure the description survived. Because that is the strange thing about the Sumerian moon. He does not stay in the sky. He comes down. He walks into cities. He gives orders to kings. He argues with his own father. He has a boat that moves without wind. He has a light that is not the light we see now. He has a schedule. He has a route. He has a job. And when the tablets describe him, they describe him with the kind of specific, physical, almost engineering detail that mythology does not usually bother with. Mythology says the moon is beautiful. The Sumerians said the moon is 30 cubits across at the base, made of polished silver, rises from a gate on the eastern mountain, and is escorted by 7 attendants whose names are listed. That is not poetry. That is a log. Tonight, over the next 3 hours, we are going to walk through the 10 records the Sumerians left about the moon, in order, from the earliest to the latest: the descent of Nanna, the wedding of Nanna and Ningal, the journey to Nippur, the curse of Agade and the moon's silence, the lament for where the moon abandons his own city, the dream of Gudea, where the moon delivers blueprints, the astronomical diary of Enheduanna, the tablet of the 7 nights, the tablet of the great eclipse, and the final record, the one the scribes called the ceiling, where Nanna leaves for the last time and the sky is described as changing color. Some of these you may have heard fragments of. Most of them you have not. All of them, taken together, form a picture of the moon that is nothing like the moon we look at now. And by the end of tonight, you are going to understand why every ancient culture that came after the Sumerians, from Babylon to Egypt, to the Hebrews, to the Greeks, kept looking up at the moon with a kind of nervousness that we have completely lost. Because they remembered what the Sumerians wrote. And what the Sumerians wrote is that the moon was not always where it is, and it was not always what it is, and it did not always belong to us. So settle in, get comfortable, turn the lights down, let the story do the work. We are going to start at the beginning, with the first record, the oldest one, the tablet that opens with the line that every Sumerian schoolchild had to memorize before they were allowed to read anything else. The line that says, "In the days when the moon had not yet risen, the earth was governed by voices from the water." Record 1, the descent of Nanna. This is the oldest of the 10 tablets, and it is also the one most modern translators have argued about the longest, because it does not begin the way a myth is supposed to begin. It does not begin with the gods creating the world. It does not begin with a hero being born. It begins with an absence. It begins with the earth already existing, already populated, already organized, and the moon not being there yet. That, by itself, is strange, because every other ancient culture we know of assumes the moon has always been in the sky. The Sumerians did not assume that. The Sumerians remembered a time before. The tablet was recovered from the ruins of the temple complex at Ur, the city that would later become Nanna's own city, the city he was said to have chosen personally as his residence on Earth. It was recovered in fragments, 22 of them, and it took nearly 40 years to piece the sequence back together in the correct order. When it was finally assembled, what emerged was a narrative in 3 parts. The days before the moon, the arrival of the moon, and the settlement of the moon into his place in the sky. The first part opens with a description of the Earth that is not, if you read it carefully, the Earth we know. The scribe says the days were long and even. There was no dividing of time. There was no counting of nights. The sun rose and set, but the sky above it, once the sun was gone, was described as being lit by the water. That is the phrase, lit by the water. Modern scholars have argued that this is a poetic reference to starlight reflecting off the marshes, or to phosphorescent algae in the Persian Gulf, or to some kind of aurora that used to be visible at that latitude in the deep past. But the tablet does not describe reflection. It describes lighting. It says the water gave light, and the water is what governed the affairs of men. Not because men worshiped the water, but because instructions came from it, voices came from it. Beings whose names the scribe does not give, only calls the old ones, would rise from the marshes at intervals and speak. This is the world the tablet describes as existing before the moon arrived. A dim, even world, without night and day as we know them, governed by water beings who came and went as they pleased and gave orders that men obeyed. And then, the tablet says, the sky opened. The Sumerian word for what happened next is difficult. It has been translated as split, as parted, as cracked, and as unfolded. Whatever the correct rendering, the image is the same. Something opened. And out of that opening came what the scribe calls a boat of light. He describes it very carefully. He says it was silver on the outside and blue on the inside. He says it was shaped like a curved horn. He says it had 2 eyes at the front, which he calls the eyes of the pilot. And he says it moved without oars, without sails, without any visible means of propulsion. It moved by itself. It descended slowly, taking, the tablet says, 7 days to come down from the opening in the sky to the level of the mountains. And during those 7 days, the tablet notes, the light of the world changed, the dimness lifted, the water beings retreated to the marshes and did not come out. And the men on the ground did not know whether to hide or to gather in the fields to watch. When the boat of light reached the level of the mountains, the tablet says, it stopped. It hovered above the eastern peaks, and then a figure stepped out of it. That figure is Nanna. The description of Nanna in the first record is one of the most extraordinary passages in Sumerian literature, and it is one of the reasons some researchers have pointed to this tablet as evidence of something more than mythology. Because the scribe does not describe a god, the scribe describes a physical being. He gives measurements. He gives colors. He gives materials. He says Nanna is tall, taller than 3 men standing on each other's shoulders. He says Nanna is dressed in a garment that is white where light strikes it and dark where light does not. He says Nanna has a headpiece that is curved like the horns of a bull, but polished, and that the headpiece gives off its own light. He says Nanna carries a staff, and that the staff is not made of wood but of something the scribe calls the bright metal, which he distinguishes from silver, from gold, from copper, and from tin, all of which the Sumerians knew and named separately. The bright metal, whatever it was something else. And then the scribe describes Nanna's face. This is the passage that gets quoted most often, because it is the strangest. He says Nanna's face was not a face. He says it was covered. He says there was a smooth surface where the eyes and mouth should have been, and that this surface reflected the sky. He says that when Nanna spoke, the sound came from the chest, not the mouth. And he says that when Nanna's attendants stepped out of the boat behind him, 7 of them, they all had the same covered face, the same reflective surface, the same voice from the chest. Now, you can read that as poetic, you can read that as a description of ritual masks. You can read that as the scribe not knowing how to describe something he had never seen before and reaching for the closest available metaphor. Or you can read it the way the scribe actually wrote it, which is as a plain description of what the witnesses saw. The Sumerians were not shy about admitting when something was symbolic. They had a word for symbol. They used it. In this passage, they do not use it. They describe, they measure, they list. Nanna descended to the eastern mountain. His 7 attendants followed him. The boat of light remained above them, unmoving, unattended, waiting. And, on the ground, the men who had gathered to watch, the tablet says, fell on their faces. Not because they were commanded to, because they could not stand. The tablet says the ground itself was vibrating. It says the air near the boat of light was warm and moving. It says the light coming off Nanna's staff was so bright that anyone who looked directly at it went blind for 3 days. This is not the way you describe a god. This is the way you describe an event. Nanna then walked, on foot, from the eastern mountain toward the plain. The tablet lists the cities he passed. It lists the rivers he crossed. It gives the number of days each stage of the journey took. And it says, at the end of a journey of 40 days, Nanna arrived at a place that would later become the city of And there, on a patch of ground that the tablet calls the chosen place, Nanna stopped. He drove his staff into the ground, and the tablet says that from the point where the staff entered the earth, a spring of water rose up, fresh water, cold water, drinkable water, in a region that had, until that moment, been salt marsh. The men who had followed him from the eastern mountain, the tablet says, drank from that spring. And when they drank, the tablet says, they understood language. Not just their own language, all languages. the language of the water beings, the language of the birds, the language of the stars. The scribe writes this passage in a strange grammatical form, using verbs that indicate not learning but receiving, as if the knowledge was poured in. And this is where the first record makes its first big statement about the moon. Because at this point in the tablet, Nanna announces what he has come for. And what he has come for, according to the tablet, is to install a schedule. That is the word, schedule. The Sumerian term is more literally rendered as counted turnings or measured passings, and it refers to the sequence of days and months. Before Nanna arrived, the tablet says, there was no month, there was no week, there was no counting. The old ones who rose from the water gave instructions when they felt like it, and men obeyed when they were told, and time was a smooth, undifferentiated thing. Nanna announced that this was over. From now on, he said, there would be a count. From now on, there would be a rhythm. From now on, there would be a moon in the sky, and it would grow and shrink on a fixed pattern. And by that pattern, men would know when to plant, when to harvest, when to rest, when to gather, when to bury their dead, and when to speak the names of the ones who had come before. The tablet says Nanna then walked back to the eastern mountain. He climbed to the top. He signaled the boat of light, which descended to meet him. He stepped inside, and the boat rose into the sky. And when it reached the height from which it had first descended, it did not disappear back through the opening. Instead, it began to move, slowly, at first, then in a fixed arc, and the tablet says that as it moved, it changed. It grew rounder. It grew whiter. It began to give off light of its own, cold light, not the light it had been carrying, but a new light, a reflected light, a borrowed light. And when it reached the position directly opposite the sun, the tablet says it was full. It was the moon. Then it began to shrink, and when it had shrunk to nothing, it disappeared. And then, after a count of 3 days, it reappeared as a thin curve in the western sky, and began the cycle again. The tablet ends the first record with a line that has been translated many different ways, but the most literal rendering is this: he does not sleep in the boat. He watches. He counts. He is the counter of the nights, and the nights are counted for a reason, and when the count is finished, the boat will open again, and he will come down. That is the ending of the first record, the descent of Nanna. And you can see already, in this one tablet, how different the Sumerian moon is from anything we grew up hearing about. This is not a moon that has always been there. This is a moon that arrived. This is not a moon that shines by accident. This is a moon that shines according to a schedule that was announced. This is not a moon that is empty. This is a moon that has a pilot inside it, and that pilot is watching, and that pilot is counting, and that pilot is waiting for something to be finished. Now, before we move on to the second record, I want to sit with what the first one is telling us, because it is easy, at this distance, to hear a story like this and file it under mythology. To say, well, of course a primitive culture would invent a story like that to explain why the moon changes shape. But the Sumerians were not primitive. They invented writing. They invented mathematics. They invented irrigation, urban planning, wheeled transport, keyline-fired brick, standardized weights, contract law, and the 60-second minute we still use today. They were, by any measure, the founding technical civilization of the human record. And when a civilization like that writes down, in its very first tablets, that the moon arrived from an opening in the sky and was piloted by a covered-faced figure with 7 attendants and a light-bearing staff, we owe it, at minimum, the courtesy of taking the description literally before we start looking for symbols. And when you take it literally, 3 details stand out. The first is the boat. The Sumerian word for the boat of Nanna is magur. It is not the word they used for riverboats. It is not the word they used for sea ships. It is a specific word that appears only in connection with celestial travel. And when you look at every context in which magur appears across the Sumerian corpus, the pattern is consistent. It is always shaped like a curved horn. It always moves without oars or sails. It always carries a single principal figure and a set of attendants. And it always comes from, or returns to, the sky. The Sumerians had a specific vocabulary for this kind of vehicle, distinct from all their other vocabulary. And they used it consistently for 2,000 years. That is not the behavior of a culture inventing metaphors. That is the behavior of a culture preserving a technical term. The second detail is the 7 attendants. 7 is the sacred number of Sumerian cosmology, and it recurs throughout the tablets in every context. So at first it looks like just a formulaic touch. But the first record does something the later records also do. It names them. Each of the 7 attendants of Nanna has a name, and the names are not the names of gods. They are the names of functions. The first attendant is called the one who opens the gate. The second is called the one who reads the count. The third is called the one who holds the light. The fourth is called the one who marks the path. The fifth is called the one who records the names. The sixth is called the one who guards the silence. And the seventh, the strangest of all, is called the one who is not seen, whose function, the tablet says, is to remain inside the boat at all times and never step out. Whatever you make of that list, it is not the list a mythology-inventing scribe would come up with. It is the list a witness would come up with if he were describing a crew. And the third detail, the one that has kept me thinking about this tablet for years, is the schedule. Because the tablet does not just say, Nanna installed a count. It says he installed a count for a reason, and that reason is not given in the first record but is alluded to, cryptically, in the closing line. When the count is finished, the boat will open again, and he will come down. That line implies that the moon's cycles are not just a natural rhythm. They are a countdown. They are ticking towards something, and whatever that something is, the first record says Nanna is watching for it, and when it comes, he will return. That is a heavy statement to find in a tablet that is nearly 5,000 years old. Because the Sumerians did not just say the moon existed. They said the moon was placed. They did not just say the moon moves. They said the moon was moved. And they did not just say the moon has phases. They said the phases mean something, and someone is counting, and the count has an end. Record 2. The Wedding of Nanna and Ningal. The second tablet in the sequence was found not at Ur, but at the sister city of Larsa, roughly 200 years later in the archaeological layer, though the language and the poetic form suggest the underlying account is older and was being copied and preserved by scribes long before the copy we possess was made. This is the tablet the Sumerians called the Bright Union, and it describes what happens after Nanna has taken his place in the sky. Because the descent, the first record, ends with Nanna in his boat, moving in his fixed arc, watching, counting. It does not tell us what he does between counts. It does not tell us where he sleeps, or who he lives with, or whether he ever comes down. The second record tells us, and what it tells us is stranger than the first. The tablet opens with a scene of Nanna alone in his boat. The scribe describes him as tired. That is the exact word, tired, which is a striking word to use for a celestial figure. And it tells you immediately that the Sumerian idea of these beings was not the idea of untouchable gods, but of beings who worked, who exhausted themselves, who needed rest. The tablet says Nanna had been in his boat for a full count of years, though the number of years is not given in this passage, and had not stepped out since the day he ascended from the eastern mountain. He had watched. He had counted. He had corrected the path of his boat when it drifted. He had spoken to the 7 attendants in the language they spoke among themselves, and he had grown tired. And then, the tablet says, the boat passed close to another light in the sky, a smaller light, a steady light. And that light, the tablet says, was a woman. Her name was Ningal. Now, this is where the second record starts to do something that the first record did not do. The first record is austere. It describes an arrival. It gives measurements. It gives lists. It is not romantic in any sense of the word. The second record is a love story. But it is a love story that keeps slipping, at odd moments, back into technical description. As if the scribe is trying to tell a beautiful tale about how the moon met his wife, but cannot help pausing every few lines to record a physical detail that a poet would not think to include. For example, when the tablet describes Ningal, it does not describe her as beautiful in the ordinary Sumerian way. It does not say her hair was like flax, or her eyes like lapis, or her skin like the milk of the cow of On. It says her light was steady. It says she did not move. It says her position in the sky was fixed, and Nanna's boat passed her every count, and every count he saw her, and every count she was in the same place. That description, if you take it literally, is not a description of a woman. It is a description of a star. And that is exactly what many modern researchers of the Sumerian corpus have concluded. That Ningal, in the second record, is being described as a specific celestial body, and that the wedding of Nanna and Ningal is not a mythological marriage, but a technical event, an alignment, a meeting of 2 orbits, a moment when the moon, in its arc across the sky, passed close enough to a fixed star that the Sumerians treated it as a union, and they gave that union a name, and they gave it a date, and they built a festival around it that was celebrated in Ur every year, at the same point in the count for 2,000 years. The tablet describes what happens next in careful stages. First, Nanna sees Ningal. He does not speak to her. He simply observes her, count after count, as his boat passes hers. The tablet says he grew accustomed to her presence. He looked for her at every passing. And when one count, she was not exactly where he expected her to be, he became agitated. The scribe uses a word here that literally means shaken, and it is the same word used elsewhere to describe men whose houses have collapsed in an earthquake. Nanna, seeing that Ningal had moved, was shaken. He asked his 7 attendants what had happened, and the one who reads the count answered him. The one who reads the count said that Ningal had not moved. Nanna's own boat had drifted. The path was slightly off. And when Nanna heard this, the tablet says, he was ashamed, because the pilot of the count is not supposed to drift. The pilot of the count is supposed to hold the ark. And Nanna, distracted by the woman of steady light, had let his ark slip. That, according to the second record, is why the moon's path is not perfectly circular, because the very first pilot, in the very first passage, was watching a woman when he should have been watching the count, and his boat inherited a small, permanent wobble from that moment of distraction. And every moon that ever crossed the sky after him has carried the wobble forward, count after count, generation after generation, because the original arc was never fully corrected. That is a strange thing to find in an ancient religious text, a confession of imprecision, an admission that the sacred motion of the moon is not perfect. And the reason it is not perfect is that the first pilot fell in love. But that is what the tablet says. And it says it not once, but 3 times, in 3 different passages, as if the scribes wanted to make sure no future generation could pretend the wobble did not exist. After this passage, the tablet describes what Nanna did about it. He corrected his boat as best he could, and he continued his count. But now, every time his boat passed close to Ningal's position, he stopped. He held the boat still in the sky, and he spoke to her. The tablet gives long passages of their conversations, and this is where the second record becomes properly a love story, because Ningal answers him. She has her own voice. She has her own opinions. She tells him that she has watched him arrive from the far side of the sky. She tells him that she was here before he came. She tells him that the water beings, the old ones, were her kin, and that she watched them retreat when he descended, and that she has been alone in the sky ever since. She tells him she has been waiting, and Nanna asks her to come with him, to leave her fixed position, to ride in his boat. She refuses. Not because she does not want to, but because she cannot. She tells him her position is not something she chose. Her position is what she is. If she leaves it, she stops existing. And Nanna, hearing this, weeps. The tablet says he wept, in the boat, in the sky, for the length of 1 full count, and the 7 attendants did not know what to do, because they had never seen him weep before. Then Nanna does something the tablet describes as the first great decision. He tells his attendants to reverse the boat. He tells them to turn around. He tells them he will hold his boat in the sky at the position beside Ningal, and he will not continue the count, and he will let the schedule fail, and he will remain with her. And here is where the second record shows you something about the Sumerian imagination that I think we have completely lost. Because the tablet, at this moment, does not celebrate the choice. It does not say Nanna's love was noble. It does not say his devotion was admirable. Instead, the tablet says the sky went dark. It says the moon stopped in its path. It says the count froze. And it says, on the earth below, the people of woke up in the morning and found that the day had not come. The sun had risen, but the sky was gray. The moon was not where it should be. The rhythm was broken. And within 3 days, the people of were sick. Their crops were dying. Their animals were falling over in the fields. Because the schedule that Nanna had installed at the end of the first record was not a decoration, it was a functional system. And when it stopped, the world underneath it started to come apart. Nanna, in the boat, saw this. And Ningal, from her fixed position, saw this. And the tablet says that Ningal spoke to Nanna and told him he had to leave. She told him that whatever the 2 of them wanted, the count came first. The count was the reason he was there. The count was the reason she had been left in position. Both of them had jobs, and their jobs were bigger than they were. So Nanna turned his boat back into the ark, and he resumed the count, and the sky brightened again on the 4th morning, and the crops recovered, and the sickness lifted from But he did not forget, and Ningal did not forget. And every count from that point onward, the tablet says, when Nanna's boat passed close to her position, he would slow slightly. Not enough to break the schedule, just enough to be near her for a fraction longer than the previous pass. And Ningal, in her fixed position, would brighten slightly. Not enough to alarm the watchers on the ground, just enough to signal to him that she saw him passing. And this, the second record says, is why the moon appears to slow and brighten at certain fixed points in its cycle. It is not an optical effect. It is not a trick of the atmosphere. It is Nanna, still, after 5,000 years, greeting his wife. The Sumerians built the entire calendar of around this passing. They marked the day of closest approach. They celebrated it as a festival. They fasted the day before and feasted the day after. They lit lamps in every window on the night of the passing, so that, the priest said, the light from below would echo the light from above, and Ningal would see the city that Nanna had chosen, and know that the people who lived there remembered her. That festival was celebrated in every year without interruption, until the city fell to invasion in the second millennium before the Common Era. And when fell, the priests fled to other cities, and they took the festival with them, and it was celebrated in Larsa, and in Nippur, and in Babylon, under different names, for another 2,000 years. Some scholars have argued that the medieval Islamic festival of the Night of Power, and the Jewish observance of the new moon, and even the Christian tradition of watching for the Star of Bethlehem, all descend, at some deep genetic level, from the Sumerian festival of the Bright Union, because when you stand outside on a clear night and look up at the moon, and you feel that faint pull in your chest that people have felt for as long as there have been people, what you are feeling, according to the second tablet, is the residue of a love story. The moon is still slowing for the star, and the star is still brightening for the moon, and the count is still going. The second record ends with a passage that I want to read to you word for word, because it is one of the most beautiful passages in the Sumerian corpus, and because it sets up the third record in a way that is easy to miss on first hearing. The scribe writes, "He passes her. She sees him pass. He counts the nights between passings. She counts the nights between seeings. Both counts agree. When the counts disagree, the world below shakes. When the counts stop, the world below ends. Therefore the counts must continue. Therefore he must not stop. Therefore she must not move. Therefore the bright union is the union of two who cannot touch. And the moon we see, and the star we do not see, are the memory of a promise made in the first count, and kept in every count since." Quick pause, and this is something new. For the first time since the 12 codes, there's a second document. It's called the 7 resets every time the world was erased, matched against the moon count evidence, and the checklist of signs for the 8th 4 are already active. Linked below, QR code on screen. That's all, back to the video. Record 3. The Journey to Nippur. The third tablet is one that scholars have wrestled with for over a century, because it appears, on the surface, to be a simple travel narrative. But the closer you read it, the more it starts to look like something else. It looks like a technical description of a diplomatic mission, and the diplomat, in this case, is the moon. The tablet was recovered from the excavations at Nippur itself, which was the religious capital of Sumer, the city that housed the great temple of Enlil, the chief of the Sumerian pantheon. If was the city of the moon, Nippur was the city of the Sky Father. And what the third tablet describes is a journey the moon made, on foot, to visit his father in Nippur and to bring him a gift. Now, before I read you what the tablet says happened on that journey, I want you to hold two things in your mind. The first is that the moon, at this point in the sequence, is a celestial figure. He is inside the boat of light. He is holding the ark. He is counting the nights. The second thing to hold in your mind is that the tablet is going to describe him walking, on the ground, through cities, carrying a physical object, speaking to physical people, and returning, at the end, to his boat in the sky. Sumerian scholarship has generally treated this as ritual language, as a description of a temple procession where a statue of Nanna was carried from to Nippur and then back to and the tablet describes the procession in cosmological terms because that was the poetic convention. That reading is defensible. It is probably even correct in some limited sense. But when you read the tablet very slowly, and you pay attention to the details the scribe includes that a ritual procession would not require, a different picture starts to emerge. And that picture is of a being who is comfortable moving between the sky and the earth. Who can be in his boat one day and on the road the next? Who does not distinguish, the way we distinguish, between celestial existence and physical existence? The tablet opens with Nanna in his boat, at rest, in a passage that describes what happens at the end of a certain long count. The tablet says that, at the end of every 100 counts, the boat pauses, It does not stop. Pausing is different from stopping. Pausing means the boat holds its position at the highest point of its arc, at the moment of the full moon, and remains there for the length of one night longer than usual. And during that extra night, the tablet says, Nanna is permitted to descend, to leave the boat, to walk on the earth, to visit whatever city or person he wishes. At the end of a certain 100 count, whose number the tablet gives but which does not translate cleanly into our calendar, Nanna decided to visit his father Enlil in Nippur. He had not seen his father since the day he was sent down to install the count. His father had, in the intervening years, sent messages, but no visits. Nanna wished to bring a report. He wished to bring, the tablet says, a gift. The gift is described very specifically. It is a jar, a sealed jar, made of alabaster on the outside, with a lining of a metal the scribe does not name but describes as bright, which we can probably identify as the same bright metal from the first tablet. Inside the jar, Nanna placed something the scribe calls the counted stones. These were, the tablet says, small, dark objects, each one about the size of a fingernail, each one polished smooth. There were 7 of them, for every count of 100 nights. Nanna had been collecting them, apparently, over the entire period since his descent. They were, the tablet implies, some kind of record, a physical log of the count. Whatever they actually were, the tablet describes Nanna placing them into the jar with great care, sealing the jar with wax, and marking the wax with a symbol that only he and his father would recognize. Then he stepped out of the boat. He descended, on a beam of light the tablet calls the shining rope, from the boat to the ground. He landed on the outskirts of Ur, and he began to walk. The tablet describes the walk city by city, from Ur to Larsa, from Larsa to Uruk, from Uruk to Shuruppak, from Shuruppak to Isin, from Isin to Nippur. At each city, Nanna paused. He did not enter the city itself. He waited outside the walls, at the gate, and the priests of the local temple would come out to meet him, and he would give them a small piece of instruction, and they would give him something in return, a cup of water, a handful of grain, a folded cloth. The tablet lists what he received at each city, and the list is precise, and it does not vary in the copies that survive. At Larsa, he received a cup of water from the spring of the Bright Union. At Uruk, he received 7 grains of the red barley from the field of An. At Shuruppak, he received a folded cloth of the black wool dyed with the ash of the reed. At Isin, he received a small clay bowl containing the honey of the mountain bee. And at Nippur, when he arrived at the gate of the great temple, the priest did not come out to greet him. Instead, the tablet says, the gate opened by itself, and Nanna walked in. Inside the temple of Enlil, the tablet describes a scene that has puzzled scholars for over 100 years, because the description does not match any known Sumerian temple architecture. It describes a room that is round, not square, which no Sumerian temple was. It describes a ceiling that is transparent, through which the stars can be seen, even in daylight. It describes a floor that is polished so smoothly that walking on it makes no sound. It describes walls that are covered in writing, but the writing, the tablet says, moves. The letters shift and rearrange themselves as you watch them. And in the center of the room, on a raised platform, sits Enlil. The description of Enlil in this passage is one of the strangest in all of Sumerian literature, because the scribe says Enlil does not look like a person. He says Enlil is a shape. He says the shape has no face and no limbs and no clear boundary, but that when you look at it, you know it is a being, and you know it is watching you, and you know it is old. Older than Nanna. Older than the count. Older, the tablet implies, than the sky itself. Nanna approached the platform. He knelt. He placed the sealed jar on the floor at Enlil's feet, and he made his report. The report, the tablet says, took the length of 1 full night to deliver. Nanna described everything that had happened since his descent. He described the men of the plain and their willingness to obey. He described the water beings and their retreat to the marshes. He described the cities that had been built and the fields that had been planted and the calendar that was now being followed. He described the schedule and how well it was being kept. He described Ningal and the passing and the wobble and the festival of the Bright Union. He described the count and how many nights had passed since the first descent, and how many nights, by his estimate, remained until the appointed end. And when he finished, Enlil spoke. The scribe writes Enlil's speech in a special grammatical form that Sumerian used only for pronouncements from the highest gods, and the translation is difficult, but the gist is this. Enlil told Nanna that the count was proceeding well. He told him that the men of the plain were behaving as expected. He told him that the water beings were not to be disturbed, that they had their own count, and that when their count ended, they would return, and Nanna's count and their count would meet at a single point, and what happened then was not for Nanna to know. But then Enlil said something that the third tablet treats as the central revelation of the entire journey. He said that Nanna's estimate of the remaining count was wrong. Nanna had estimated a certain number of nights until the appointed end. Enlil told him the number was smaller. Much smaller. He told Nanna that the end was closer than Nanna had thought, and that Nanna should therefore be more careful with his arc, more precise with his counting, and more attentive to the men of the plain. Because when the end came, it would come suddenly, and there would not be time to warn them. Nanna, the tablet says, was disturbed. He asked his father how the number could have shrunk. He asked whether something had changed, whether the men of the plain had done something wrong, whether the water beings had accelerated their own count. Enlil did not answer directly. He only said that the sky itself was moving, and that Nanna, from inside his boat, could not see the movement, but that Enlil, from his platform in Nippur, could, and that the movement was in the direction of the end. Then Enlil dismissed him. Nanna bowed. He picked up the sealed jar, which Enlil had not opened, and placed it back at the foot of the platform. He turned. He walked out of the round room. The gate closed behind him, and he began the walk back. The return journey, the tablet says, was silent. Nanna did not stop at the cities. He did not receive gifts. He walked directly from Nippur to the outskirts of and there he waited for the shining rope, and when it descended, he climbed it, and he returned to his boat, and he resumed his arc. But something had changed. The tablet says the 7 attendants noticed it immediately. Nanna, when he returned, was quieter. He did not speak to them for many counts. He did not eat, though the tablet does not say what he normally ate. He did not rest, though the tablet says he had always rested before. He watched the count. He held the arc. He passed Ningal at the fixed point, and he slowed for her, and she brightened for him. But the joy was gone. The tablet uses the word gone, and the joy did not return. And here's what the third record leaves you with. The moon, at the end of the third tablet, is no longer just a scheduler. He is a scheduler who knows the schedule is running short. He is watching the sky for signs of the movement his father described, and he cannot see them, but he trusts that they are there. He is passing his wife, count after count, and he is thinking about the end. He is holding the boat in its arc, and he is holding the count in its rhythm, and he is holding, above all, the secret that his father told him in the round room in Nippur, which is that the end is closer than the men of the plain suspect, and that when it comes, there will be no time to warn them. Some researchers have argued that the third tablet is the source of every subsequent Mesopotamian tradition about the coming of a great flood, a great fire, a great darkness, a great judgment. They have argued that the Sumerians did not invent the idea of an apocalypse. They inherited it, and they inherited it from the moon himself, who was told by his father, in the round room at Nippur, that the count was shorter than he had thought. Whether or not that is what the tablet is actually saying, the pattern it sets up is one that recurs in every later Sumerian text about Nanna. The moon is always counting. The moon is always watching. And the moon is always quietly waiting. Record 4. The Curse of Agade and the Silence of the Moon. The fourth tablet moves us forward in the sequence to a period that Sumerologists have identified with reasonable confidence. It concerns the reign of Naram-Sin, the grandson of Sargon of Akkad, the first great empire builder of the ancient world. And it concerns what happened when Naram-Sin, at the height of his power, made a decision that the tablet describes as the single most consequential act of impiety in the history of the plain. He entered a temple he had not been invited into, and the moon, watching from his boat, went silent for a full year. Now, the standard scholarly reading of the Curse of Agade is that it is a moralistic tale composed after the fall of the Akkadian Empire, in which later scribes projected the collapse of Naram-Sin's dynasty backward and gave it a cosmic cause. Under this reading, the story is a political sermon dressed in religious clothing. The historical Naram-Sin, they argue, was a competent king who oversaw a period of prosperity and then died, and the empire fell to invaders for reasons that had nothing to do with the moon. The tablet, in this reading, is fiction, but the tablet does not read like fiction. The tablet reads like a report. It gives dates, it gives sequences, it gives names of witnesses. It describes physical events that took place in specific locations, and it describes the reactions of specific people to those events in the kind of detail that fiction does not usually bother with. And most importantly, The tablet describes a phenomenon that, if it actually happened, would have been recorded by every observatory in the ancient world. The moon went silent for a year, and when the tablet says silent, it does not mean quiet. It means the moon did not appear. For a full count of 12 moons, the sky was moonless. This is the event the fourth record is written to explain, and whatever you make of the explanation, the underlying claim that there was a period of 1 year during the reign of Naram-Sin when the moon was not visible in the sky is a claim that would leave physical evidence in the form of astronomical records from other cultures. And it is worth noting that the astronomical records from other cultures of that period do indeed show a disruption. The Egyptian records of the equivalent period speak of a year of the dark sky. The Chinese records of the equivalent period speak of the year the moon hid. The Vedic records of the equivalent period speak of the year Soma was withdrawn. These records were made independently, in cultures that had no contact with one another, and they all describe the same year, and they all say the same thing. The moon was gone. The Sumerian tablet is the only one that says why. The tablet opens with a description of Naram-Sin at the height of his reign. He had conquered the 4 quarters. He had brought grain from the mountains and gold from the sea. He had built roads. He had built cities. He had declared himself a living god, which was something no Sumerian king had done before. And, the tablet says, he had begun to feel that his power was without limit, that there was nothing in the sky or on the earth that he could not touch. At the center of his empire, in the city of Agade, which was his own creation, Naram-Sin had built a magnificent temple. The tablet describes the temple in great detail: walls of white brick, gates of cedar, floors of polished stone, ceilings inlaid with lapis and gold. It was, the tablet says, the most beautiful building on the plain. And it was dedicated not to any of the sky gods but to Naram-Sin himself, to the living king, who was, in his own estimation, now equal to An, equal to Enlil, equal even to Nanna the moon. But there was one temple in the empire that Naram-Sin had not built, and that was the temple of Enlil at Nippur, the oldest temple, the most sacred temple, the temple whose round inner room the tablet mentions in a brief aside no living human had ever entered. It was reserved, it was set apart. Even the high priests of Nippur, when they served the temple, served only in the outer chambers. The round room was left empty, except when Enlil chose to occupy it, and even then it was invisible to the priests. Only Nanna, the moon, had ever been inside. And that was 500 years before Naram-Sin's reign. In the events of the third tablet, Naram-Sin, the fourth tablet says, decided that this was intolerable, that there could not be a room in his empire that his own foot had not touched, that his equality with the gods required his equality with the space of the gods. And so he assembled his army, and he marched from Agade to Nippur, and he arrived at the gate of the temple of Enlil, and he demanded to be admitted to the round room. The high priest of Nippur, the tablet says, prostrated himself in front of the king. He begged him to reconsider. He told him that the round room could not be entered, that it was not a room in the ordinary sense, that its walls did not obey the ordinary laws of walls, that its floor did not obey the ordinary laws of floors, that the writing on its walls moved, and the ceiling, though it looked solid, was in fact open to the stars, and that anyone who stood in the room stood, in some sense, in the sky itself, that the room was not a place, it was a passage, and it was not meant for men. Naram-Sin did not listen. He drew his sword. He killed the high priest at the gate. He ordered his soldiers to break the outer doors, and they did. The soldiers rushed in. They passed through the outer chambers, which were empty. They came to the inner chamber, which was sealed with a door of a single sheet of copper, undecorated. Naram-Sin, the tablet says, kicked the door. It did not open. He struck it with the pommel of his sword. It did not open. He ordered his soldiers to break it down. They tried. They could not. The copper, though it looked thin, was harder than anything they had encountered. Their axes bent. Their hammers shattered. The door did not move. Naram-Sin, in his rage, the tablet says, then did something no king had ever done. He took a torch from one of his soldiers, and he held it against the copper door. The door began to glow, not with the color of heated metal, but with a color the scribe calls the color of the moon on a cold night. The room behind the door, the tablet says, began to hum. A low sound, a vibration. Naram-Sin felt it through the ground. His soldiers felt it. Their teeth, the scribe writes, ached. Their eyes watered. But they held their positions because their king had commanded it. The door glowed brighter. The humming grew louder. And then, all at once, the door opened. Not by breaking, not by melting. It simply was not there anymore, and the room behind it was visible. The scribe describes what Naram-Sin saw. He does not describe it clearly, because, the scribe says, the man who reported this scene to the scribes was one of the soldiers who stood behind Naram-Sin, and the soldier was not able to look directly at the room, because looking directly at it made him vomit. But he was able to describe what he saw at the edges, in glances. He saw a floor that seemed to be made of light. He saw walls that were covered in the moving writing the third tablet describes. He saw a ceiling that was not a ceiling, but was open to the sky. And the sky in that opening was not the sky of Nippur. It was a different sky, a darker sky, a sky with stars in different positions. A sky, the soldier said, that he did not recognize. Naram-Sin, the tablet says, stood in the doorway. He did not enter. He did not need to. What he had done, by opening the door, was already done. The room had been sealed. He had unsealed it. That was the transgression. And the punishment began immediately. The scribe describes what happened next in a passage of extraordinary specificity. First, a sound came out of the room. Not a voice. A sound. Like wind, but colder. Like water, but sharper. The sound came out of the room and passed through Naram-Sin's body, and the tablet says he did not feel it as pain but as a subtraction, as if something had been taken out of him. His soldiers felt the same. They stood, dazed, unable to move. Then, above them, though they were inside the temple, they heard a second sound. This one they recognized. It was the sound of the boat of light, the Magur, Nanna's boat. It was passing overhead. It was passing much lower than usual. It was passing, the tablet says, so low that the top of the temple shook as it went by, and the shadow of the boat fell across the open doorway of the round room. And for a moment the light inside the room dimmed, and then the boat rose. It rose fast. It rose to a height greater than it had ever occupied before, and it kept rising, until, the tablet says, it disappeared from the sky altogether. That was the first day. For the next 12 moons, the fourth tablet says, the moon was not seen, not once, not a sliver, not a shadow. The sky, at night, was black. The stars burned brighter than they ever had, because there was no moon to compete with them, but the moon itself was gone. And with it went every function of the schedule that Nanna had installed at the end of the first tablet. The count could not be kept, because there was no moon to count. The festivals could not be observed, because they were tied to phases that were not occurring. The crops could not be planted at the correct times, because the correct times were determined by the count. And within 3 moons, the tablet says, famine had begun in every city on the plain. Naram-Sin, in Agade, sat on his throne. He watched his empire begin to starve. He sent messengers to Nippur, offering to rebuild the temple, offering to restore the door, offering to be judged and punished in whatever way the priests decided. The priests of Nippur did not answer him, not because they refused, because they could not. The tablet says that when the moon disappeared, the priests of Nippur also fell silent. They stopped speaking. They stopped eating. They sat in the outer chambers of the temple, staring at the wall, and they did not respond to anything. As if their voices had been taken with the moon, as if they had been switched off. Naram-Sin, the tablet says, then did the second unprecedented thing of his reign. He walked, alone, from Agade to Nippur. He did not bring his army. He did not bring his advisors. He did not bring his crown. He walked in the clothes of a common man, and he arrived at the gate of the temple of Enlil, and he prostrated himself in the dust. And he begged. He begged for 4 days and 4 nights. He did not eat. He did not drink. He did not lift his head. And on the 4th night, the tablet says, the moon returned. It did not return the way it had left. It did not simply appear in the sky. It returned by descending. The boat of light came down from a great height. It descended slowly, the same way it had descended in the first tablet, though this time the men of the plain did not gather to watch, because the men of the plain were too weak with hunger to gather. The boat came down, and Nanna stepped out of it, and he stood, in his full description, tall and covered-faced and light-bearing, in the courtyard of the temple of Enlil at Nippur, in front of Naram-Sin, who did not raise his head. And Nanna spoke. This is one of the few passages in the entire Sumerian corpus where the moon speaks directly, in his own voice, in an extended passage. And what he says, the tablet reports word for word. He says, I did not leave because I was angry. I left because the door was opened. When the door is opened, the count breaks. When the count breaks, I cannot see the plane. When I cannot see the plane, I cannot count for the plane. Therefore I withdrew. Now the door has been closed. I did not close it. Your prostration closed it. Your hunger closed it. Your silence closed it, not your prayer. The door does not care about prayer. It cares about the count. And the count has resumed. I will resume with it. But the year that has been lost is lost. The count has not paused. The count has continued in my absence. The end has come 12 moons closer. And the men of the plain now have 12 fewer moons to prepare for what is coming. You have not shortened your life, Naram-Sin. You have shortened everyone's life. Every man on the plain now has less time. Every child born tonight has less time. Every field planted next spring has less time. And when the end comes, and it will come, and the moment approaches, the men of the plain will remember your name not because you conquered the 4 quarters, but because you unsealed the door and cost them a year. Then, the tablet says, Nanna returned to his boat, and the boat rose into the sky, and it took its position in the ark, and the count resumed at the point where it had broken. And Naram-Sin, still prostrate in the dust, stood up, and he walked back to Agade. And the tablet says he did not speak. From that day forward, for the rest of his life, he ruled in silence. He signed his decrees by mark, not by word. He died 3 years later, in his sleep. And his empire began to collapse within a moon of his death, and it was gone, entirely, within a generation. The 4th record ends with a warning. It is written in the 2nd person, addressed to whoever is reading the tablet. It says, Do not open the sealed door. Do not enter the round room. Do not stand in the doorway of what is not meant for men. The count is fragile. The moon is watching. The end is coming. When you shorten your own time, you shorten everyone's. When you break the schedule cannot be repaired. What is lost is lost. The moon does not give back the year. Record 5. The Lament for Ur. The 5th tablet is, by many measures, the most famous of the 10. It has been translated into more modern languages than any other Sumerian text. It has been recited in university lecture halls for over 100 years. It has been called, by scholars of comparative literature, the first great elegy in human history. It is the poem the Sumerians composed when their oldest city fell, when the walls were breached, when the temples burned, when the priests were killed at their altars, and when, most terribly of all, the moon abandoned Ur and did not come back. That is the version of the 5th tablet that gets taught in universities. It is a poem about the destruction of a city. It is a poem about loss. It is a poem about grief. And in all of those senses, it is a genuine and profound literary achievement. But when you read the tablet in its full form, when you go past the famous passages that get anthologized, when you read the middle sections and the closing sections that are usually cut for length, a second layer emerges. And that second layer is not a poem at all. It is a report of what the moon did as his own city fell, where he went, what he took with him, and, most importantly, what he said before he left. The tablet begins with the famous opening lines. The city of Ur, once beautiful, has become a place of dust. The great gates, once bright with copper, have become a place of dust. The wide streets, once filled with the voices of men, have become a place of dust. The temple of Nanna, once white with brick, has become a place of dust. Everything the light touched has become a place of dust. This opening runs for about 200 lines in the Sumerian, and it is the section that gets translated and quoted because it is beautiful, because it is universal, because any culture that has ever lost a city can recognize it. Then, in the middle of the tablet, the scribe does something unexpected. He shifts from lament to narrative. He starts telling the story of what happened in the days before the fall, and he tells it from the perspective of the moon. This is the section that is not usually translated in the popular editions. Let me walk you through it now. The tablet says that in the moons before Ur fell, Nanna, in his boat, saw the invasion coming. He saw the armies gathering in the eastern mountains. He saw the horses. He saw the war carts. He saw the sharpened bronze. And he saw, more importantly than all of these, that the count in the boat was reaching a specific point, a point his father Enlil had warned him about in a message sent decades earlier that had not been included in the 4th tablet's account but was recorded in the archives of Ur and referenced here in the 5th. The message from Enlil had said that Ur, the city of the moon, would fall at a specific count, and that when it fell, Nanna was not to intervene. He was not to descend. He was not to save the city. He was to hold his ark. He was to keep his count. And he was to let the fall happen. Nanna, the 5th tablet says, tried to argue. He sent his own message back to Nippur. He asked why. He pointed out that was the city he had chosen at the end of the first tablet, on the day of his descent. He pointed out that the spring at had risen where his staff had struck the ground. He pointed out that the people of had held the festival of the Bright Union for 2,000 years, that they had lit lamps in every window, that they had honored Ningal, that they had honored him. Was he now supposed to watch them burn? Enlil's answer, the fifth tablet says, came back in 3 words. Hold the count. That was it. No explanation. No comfort. Just the instruction. Hold the count. Nanna, the tablet says, obeyed. But it broke something in him, and the middle section of the 5th tablet is essentially a description of the moon's grief. Not as poetry, as physical detail. The tablet says his light dimmed. Not the reflected light of his boat, which is the moon we see, but his own light, the light of his person, the light he carried inside the boat. It dimmed. His 7 attendants, the tablet says, could see it dimming. The one who holds the light told the others that Nanna's inner glow was fading. The one who reads the count told the others that Nanna was still keeping the ark accurately, but that he was doing so, now, without joy. The one who guards the silence told the others to leave Nanna alone and let him grieve. And then the invasion came. The 5th tablet describes the fall of in a passage that is one of the most physically detailed accounts of an ancient siege that we have. The scribe describes the mustering of the army of Elam, the march across the plain, the arrival at the walls of on the 3rd day of the harvest moon, the first assault, which was repulsed, the second assault, which broke the outer gate, the third assault, which entered the city, the burning of the granary, the killing of the men who resisted, the taking of the women and the children who did not, and, at the center of it all, the sacking of the great temple of Nanna, which sat at the highest point of the city, and which the Elamites entered by climbing the ziggurat on ropes, because the doors at the base had been sealed with mud brick by the priests when the assault began. Inside the temple, the tablet says, the priests waited. They knew they would be killed. They wore their ceremonial robes. They stood in the correct positions for the evening ritual. They lit the 7 lamps of the count. And when the Elamite soldiers broke through the roof and dropped down into the sanctuary, the priests were praying, and the soldiers killed them where they stood, quickly and cleanly, because the soldiers, though enemies, were not without respect for the office of the priesthood. But when they had killed the priests, the soldiers, the tablet says, hesitated, because they had come for gold, and there was no gold in the sanctuary. There was no silver. There were no jewels. There was nothing except the 7 lamps, which were still burning, and a small alabaster jar, sealed with wax, sitting on the altar. The captain of the Elamite soldiers, whose name the tablet gives as Kudur, picked up the jar. He examined it. He did not open it. He put it in his pack. He gave orders to his men to leave the lamps burning, because, he said, they were not gold, and there was no reason to steal them. And then he left the sanctuary, and he led his men down the ziggurat, and they continued the sack of the city. Now hold that image for a moment, because that jar, the alabaster jar sealed with wax, is the jar Nanna carried to Nippur in the 3rd tablet, the jar of the counted stones, except this jar was different. It had appeared in the temple only 3 days before the invasion. No one knew where it had come from. The priests had assumed Nanna had placed it there, as a sign. But they had not opened it, because it was not their place to open sealed jars from the moon. And when the temple fell, the jar was still sealed. And Kudur the Elamite took it. The 5th tablet then follows Kudur for several passages. It describes his march back across the plain, his return to Elam, his entry into the palace of his king, and his presentation of the spoils of including the jar. The king of Elam, the tablet says, ordered the jar opened. Kudur cut the wax. He lifted the lid, and what came out of the jar was not counted stones. What came out was a sound, the same sound the 4th tablet described coming from the round room at Nippur when Naram Sin opened the door. A sound like wind, but colder. Like water, but sharper. And that sound, the tablet says, spread across the palace of the king of Elam, and then across the city of Susa, and then across the plain of Elam, and within 12 moons the king of Elam was dead, and his dynasty had ended, and Susa itself had been sacked by a rival kingdom, and the jar had been lost in the fire. The Sumerians called this the answer of the moon, because while Nanna, in his boat, had obeyed his father and had not intervened to save he had also, quietly, arranged for the price to be paid. The jar was a trap. It was a delayed punishment. It was the moon's way of enforcing the balance that the Sky Father had refused to enforce for him, and the tablet describes this as if it were a minor operational detail. a footnote, not the main story. The main story was still the grief of the moon over the loss of his city. The tablet then returns to Nanna. It describes him in the boat, watching burn, watching the walls fall, watching the temple sacked, watching the priests killed, watching the jar taken, watching and holding the ark, and keeping the count. The scribe then writes the passage that gives the tablet its title, the Lament. And in this passage, Nanna speaks, not to his attendants, not to his father, not to Ningal, to the city itself, to the walls and streets and gates and temples of which are now in ruins. He addresses them by name, each gate, each street, each temple, each of the 7 walls of the outer city, and each of the 3 walls of the inner city. He names them all. And to each of them, he says a variation of the same thing. I chose you. I chose the ground you were built on. I struck my staff into the earth, and the spring rose up. I walked among your streets. I lived in your temple. I heard my name spoken by your priests every night for 2,000 years. And now you are dust, and I could not save you, and I will not forget you. Then Nanna does something that no other Sumerian text describes any celestial figure doing. He leaves. The tablet says that at the moment of the final destruction of the temple, when the last of the priests had been killed and the last of the walls had fallen, Nanna gave an order to his 7 attendants. He told the one who marks the path to change the ark, to move the boat, to shift its position in the sky, not by a small amount, by a significant amount. The tablet gives a specific measurement, and while the modern equivalent is disputed, all the scholars agree that the shift was large. The boat, from that day forward, would no longer pass directly over Its arc would move north. It would pass over Nippur instead. Over Babylon, which was at that time a small town but would soon rise. Over the cities of the north, and it would pass over the ruins of only in an oblique glance, on the edge of its arc, not overhead. The one who marks the path, the tablet says, hesitated. He asked Nanna if he was certain. He pointed out that the ark had been set at the beginning, at the first descent, and that the schedule of the count was calibrated to the original ark. Any change would introduce errors. The festivals of the northern cities would still align, but the festivals of the southern cities, of and Uruk and Eridu, would drift. The count itself would remain, but the geography of the count would shift. Nanna, the tablet says, told him to do it anyway. He said the geography no longer mattered. He said the southern cities were gone. He said the count would now serve the north. And he said, in a line that the scribe writes with heavy solemnity, that he could not bear to look down at the ruins of his own city, night after night, for the rest of the count. He would look elsewhere. He would let the ruins pass out of his view. And the men of the future, if they built new cities on the site of would have to look up at a moon that no longer looked back at them. The boat shifted. The ark changed. And the 5th tablet ends with a series of passages that are among the most haunting in the Sumerian corpus, because they describe what it feels like, on the ground, to live in a city over which the moon no longer directly passes. The scribe describes the survivors of wandering in the ruins, looking up at night and seeing the moon at a distance, on the far edge of the sky, moving in an arc that no longer includes them. He describes the way the light falls differently, the way the shadows are cast at strange angles, the way the festivals, when they are attempted, feel wrong, because the sky above is not the sky the festivals were designed for. He describes an old woman, one of the survivors, who lived in the ruins for many years, and who told the children who gathered around her fire in the evenings that when she had been a girl, the moon had passed directly over her head, and she had felt its light on her face like a warm hand. And now the moon passed to the side, and the light on her face was cold, and the children, who had been born after the fall, did not understand what she meant. Because for them, the moon had always been at a distance. They had never known it any other way. That, the 5th tablet says, is what the lament for is really about. It is not about the loss of the city. Cities are lost. Cities have always been lost. It is about the loss of the direct light of the moon, which was, according to the Sumerians, a specific and physical thing, and which, according to the 5th tablet, was taken away from the southern plain on a specific night in the reign of the last king of and has not returned since. And here's the strangest claim of the 5th tablet. It is a claim that most translators skip or footnote because it is difficult to know what to make of it. But it is there, in the last passage of the tablet, and it is written with the same matter-of-fact tone as the descriptions of the invasion and the sacking. The scribe writes, he says, "The ark has shifted, but the ark will shift again. When the count reaches its end, The boat will return to the original position. It will pass, one more time, over the ruins of Ur. It will pass low, lower than it has ever passed. And on that night, the light on the ground will be the direct light of the first descent. And any city that stands on the site of Ur on that night will burn. And any man who stands on that ground on that night will see the boat open, and the moon step out, and the count end. That is what the fifth tablet says, that the shift of the ark after the fall of Ur was not permanent, that it was a mourning, and that at the end of the count, whenever that is, the mourning will end, and the moon will return to Ur, and the return will not be gentle. Record 6. The Dream of Gudea. The sixth tablet takes us into a very different mood. After the destruction of Ur, after the abandonment of the ark, after the shift of the moon's path to the north, the Sumerian world entered a long period of quiet. The great southern cities were in ruins. The northern cities were rising, but they were not yet centers of culture in the way that Ur had been. There is a gap in the Sumerian records, a gap that some scholars measure at almost 200 years, during which very little was written down. And when writing resumed, it resumed under new rulers, in new cities, in new dialects, and with a new relationship to the moon. The sixth tablet was recovered from the ruins of the city of Lagash, and it dates to the reign of Gudea, one of the last great Sumerian kings, who ruled for almost 20 years and left behind more surviving inscriptions than any of his contemporaries. Gudea is known to history primarily as a builder. He rebuilt the temples of Lagash on a scale that had not been seen since the fall of Ur. He restored the canals. He restored the roads. He restored the ritual calendar. He was, in every sense, a restorer. And the sixth tablet is the account of the vision that made him one. The tablet is written in the first person. That is unusual. Sumerian religious texts are almost always written in the third person, from the perspective of an omniscient scribe. The sixth tablet is written as if Gudea himself is speaking, dictating to a scribe, describing an event that happened to him personally. And what he describes is a dream, but it is not an ordinary dream. It is a dream that lasts for 3 nights. It occurs after Gudea has finished the outer walls of a new temple, when he has come to the point in the construction where he needs to design the inner sanctuary, and he does not know what the sanctuary should look like. He has consulted the priests. He has consulted the architects. He has consulted the old drawings that survive from the temples of the south. None of them agree, and Gudea, exhausted, lies down in the still unfinished sanctuary of his new temple, on a blanket, on the packed earth, and he falls asleep. And the moon comes to him. The tablet describes the arrival in great detail. Gudea says he was dreaming an ordinary dream about the fields of Lagash. He was walking through the barley, feeling the wind, watching the birds. And then, he says, everything changed. The sky above him opened, and through the opening came a light, and the light descended, and it took the shape of a figure, and the figure stood in front of him in the field, and the figure was Nanna. Gudea describes him in the same terms the first tablet used: tall, covered face, white garment with the light and dark alternation, horned headpiece, staff of the bright metal, voice from the chest. But he adds one detail that is not in the first tablet. He says Nanna was carrying something, a rolled sheet, a scroll of some kind, made of a material Gudea did not recognize. Thinner than papyrus, more flexible than clay, and with a slight sheen that reflected the light of the staff. Nanna, in the dream, unrolled the sheet, and on it, Gudea says, were drawings. The drawings were architectural. They showed a temple, not the outside of a temple, the inside, the inner sanctuary, the exact chamber Gudea had been trying to design. And the drawings were more detailed than any architectural plan Gudea had ever seen. They showed the floor, the walls, the ceiling, the placement of the altar, the placement of the 7 lamps, the angle of the light that would enter through the roof at each phase of the count, the specific alignment of the sanctuary with the moon's arc, as the arc now ran in its shifted position. Everything. And on the edge of the sheet, in the corner, there was writing. Writing Gudea did not recognize. Not Sumerian, not the pictographic writing of the Old South, not the linear writing of the North. Something else. A writing that appeared to move, the same way the walls of the round room at Nippur had moved in the fourth tablet. The letters shifted as Gudea watched them, and yet, somehow, he could read them, not by looking at them, by hearing them. The writing spoke into his mind, and it told him what each drawing meant, and what each measurement was for, and how the whole design fitted together. Gudea, in the dream, tried to take the sheet from Nanna. He wanted to bring it back with him. He wanted to have it in his hands when he woke up, but Nanna did not give it to him. He held it out for Gudea to see, and he explained it, and he answered Gudea's questions, but he did not let Gudea touch it. The sheet, Nanna said, could not leave the boat. What Gudea needed to remember, he would remember. What he did not need to remember, he would forget. And that would be the correct amount. The dream, Gudea says, then continued into the details of the design. Nanna walked him through the sanctuary point by point. The altar, he said, was to be placed exactly in the center. Not near the center, exactly, measured from all 4 walls. The 7 lamps were to be arranged in a specific pattern, not in a row, not in a circle, but in a shape that mirrored the arrangement of 7 stars in the northern sky, which Nanna named individually. The ceiling was to be pierced by a single small hole, no wider than the joint of a man's finger, at a specific point calculated from the position of the altar. And through that hole, at exactly the full moon of the summer count, the light of the moon would fall directly onto the altar, not near the altar, on it, on the exact center point. That was the alignment, and Nanna explained to Gudea that when the alignment was correct, and the temple was completed according to the design, something would happen, not immediately, not on the first full moon after completion, but at a certain future full moon, whose count Nanna gave him but which Gudea, when he woke up, could not remember. On that specific future night, when the light of the moon fell through the hole in the ceiling and landed on the altar, the light would do something more than illuminate the altar. It would activate it, and the altar, Nanna said, would speak. Gudea, in the dream, asked what the altar would say. Nanna did not tell him. He said only that the altar would say what needed to be said, and that Gudea, or whoever was king at that time, or whoever was priest at that time, would hear it and would know what to do. The dream then continued for the remainder of the first night. Nanna showed Gudea the rest of the temple, the outer chambers, the gate, the courtyard, the placement of the well, the angle of the door in relation to the rising moon, every detail. And on the second night, Nanna returned. And on the third night, Nanna returned again. And on the third night, at the end, Nanna gave Gudea one final instruction. He said, "Build it. Build it correctly. Do not deviate. Do not improvise. The design is not yours. It is not Sumerian. It is older than Sumer. And when it is built, it will function. And when it functions, the count will advance. And when the count advances, the day will come." Then Nanna, the tablet says, folded the sheet. He rolled it. He tucked it under his arm. He turned. He walked back toward the light in the sky. He entered the light. And Gudea woke up. Gudea says he woke up before dawn. He was still in the unfinished sanctuary. The blanket was still under him. The stars were still visible through the open roof, which had not yet been covered. And he remembered, he says, exactly what he had been shown. He called for scribes. He called for architects. He called for the masters of the copper trade, and the masters of the stone trade, and the masters of the wood trade. He assembled them in the courtyard of the temple before the sun rose, and he began to dictate. He described the sanctuary as Nanna had shown it to him, the position of the altar, the arrangement of the 7 lamps, the size and location of the hole in the ceiling, the angle of the door, the material of the walls. He described everything, in detail, for the length of one full day. And the scribes wrote it down, and the architects drew it. And by the end of the day, the plan of the sanctuary existed on clay, in ink, in wax, in copies, in triplicate, so that it could not be lost. Then, the tablet says, Gudea began to build. He built for 8 years. He did not build hastily. He did not cut corners. He did not deviate. He followed the design exactly as Nanna had given it, checking every measurement, every alignment, every material, against what he remembered from the dream. And at the end of 8 years, the sanctuary was finished. The altar was in place. The lamps were installed. The hole in the ceiling was cut. The door was hung. The temple was ready. And Gudea, on the night of the first full moon after the completion, went to the sanctuary alone. He lit the 7 lamps. He stood by the wall, out of the way, and he waited. The light, the tablet says, came through the hole. It fell exactly where Nanna had said it would fall, on the exact center of the altar. Not near it, on it. The alignment was perfect. But the altar did not speak. Gudea waited all night. He watched the light move across the altar, as the moon moved across the sky, until the light left the altar and struck the wall, and then the floor, and then disappeared as the moon set. And nothing happened. The altar was silent. Gudea, the tablet says, was not troubled. He remembered what Nanna had told him, that the altar would speak at a certain future full moon, whose count Gudea did not remember. It might be the next month. It might be 100 months later. It might be 1,000. Gudea did not know. He knew only that his job had been to build the temple, and his job was done, and the rest was for the future. He returned the next month, and the month after that, and every full moon for the rest of his reign, for another 12 years, he came to the sanctuary and lit the 7 lamps and waited. And every month the light fell on the altar, and the altar was silent. And every month Gudea, the tablet says, was satisfied, because the design was working, and the alignment was holding, and someday the altar would speak. And it was enough, for now, to keep it ready. Gudea died at the end of his reign, in his own bed, in the palace at Lagash, at an advanced age. The tablet says his last words, spoken to the priest who sat beside him, were about the altar. He asked whether it had spoken yet. The priest said no. Gudea said, "Then someone else will hear it. Do not let the temple fall." And here is the strangest thing about the 6th tablet. Because the temple of Gudea at Lagash was not destroyed at the fall of the Sumerian world. It was not sacked by the Elamites. It was not burned by the Amorites. It was not razed by the Assyrians. It survived. It survived, in one form or another, for over 2,000 years. The Babylonians expanded it. The Assyrians incorporated it into a larger complex. The Persians renovated it. The Seleucids added to it. And when Alexander the Great passed through the region in the 4th century before the Common Era, the Temple of Lagash was still standing, still functional, and still, according to the Greek historians who described it, containing an altar at the center of a small sanctuary with a hole in the ceiling through which the full moon fell each month. And the altar, the Greek historians report, had never spoken, not once, in 2,000 years, but it was still there. It was still ready. And the priests who tended it, generation after generation, culture after culture, kept it clean, kept the lamps lit, kept the hole in the ceiling clear of debris, and kept waiting. The temple, according to the last Roman records that mention it, was still standing in the 2nd century after the Common Era. It was abandoned at some point between then and the Islamic conquest of Mesopotamia in the 7th century. Its ruins were rediscovered by French archaeologists in the late 19th century. And when they excavated the sanctuary, they found the altar, still in place, still in the exact center of the room. The 7-lamp arrangement was still marked on the floor in copper inlays. The hole in the ceiling was still there, though the ceiling itself had partially collapsed, and the altar, when they cleaned it, showed a mark. A single mark in the exact center. A shallow depression, about the size of a man's palm, that had been worn into the stone. Not by tools, by something else. Something that had been landing on that spot, in that same position, month after month, for over 4,000 years. The archaeologists, in their published report, described the depression as consistent with prolonged, focused thermal exposure, meaning, in ordinary language, that whatever had been falling on that spot for 4,000 years had been hot. The full moon is not hot. The light of the full moon carries no measurable heat, and yet the altar of Gudea, at the exact spot where the moonlight was designed to fall, has a depression worn into it that the archaeologists could only describe by using the language of heat. The 6th tablet does not explain this. The 6th tablet ends with Gudea's death and the priest's promise not to let the temple fall. Everything after that is our reconstruction from later sources. But the pattern that the 6th tablet establishes is important, and it is the pattern that carries through the rest of the 10 records. The moon does not just count. The moon does not just observe. The moon designs. The moon delivers plans. The moon builds installations, through human hands, that are designed to activate at a specific future moment. And when that moment comes, the installations will do whatever they were designed to do. And the people who inherited them, who tended them, who kept them ready, will find out what that thing is. Record 7. The Astronomical Diary of Enheduanna. The 7th tablet is different from every tablet that came before it, because it was not written by a scribe recording someone else's account. It was written by the observer herself. And the observer, Enheduanna, is the first named author in human history. She was the daughter of Sargon of Akkad, the great-grandfather of the Naram Sin we met in the 4th tablet. She was installed as the high priestess of Nanna at the temple of Ur when she was still a young woman. And she held that position for over 40 years. During those 40 years, she wrote hymns. She wrote laments. She wrote what we would today call theology. And she wrote, most remarkably, an astronomical diary. a night-by-night record of what the moon did, from the roof of the temple of Nanna at Ur, for a period of over 3 decades. The diary itself has not survived in complete form. What survives is a compilation, made after her death by scribes who copied selected entries into a single tablet for archival purposes. That tablet is the 7th in our sequence. It contains a little over 200 entries, distributed across the years of Enheduanna's tenure, chosen because they recorded events that the compiling scribes considered significant. And what those entries describe, taken together, is a portrait of the moon as seen by the closest observer he ever had. She watched him every night, every single night, for 40 years, from the roof of his own temple, and she wrote down what she saw. The early entries in the compilation are straightforward. They describe positions. They describe times of rising and setting. They describe the phase of the moon on specific dates. They are, essentially, the raw data of ancient astronomy. But even in the early entries, there are anomalies. Enheduanna records nights on which the moon rose late, by measurable amounts. She records nights on which the moon set early, again by measurable amounts. She records nights on which the moon appeared at the wrong position, off from where the previous night's motion would have predicted, by a small but non-zero angle. And she records these anomalies without alarm, matter-of-factly, as if they were expected, as if they were part of the pattern, not deviations from it. Because Enheduanna, over her 40 years, developed a theory of these anomalies, and her theory, laid out in the middle entries of the compilation, is what makes the 7th tablet one of the most remarkable documents in the ancient world. She proposed that the moon has 3 motions, not 1. The first motion is the daily arc, which everyone can see, and which is the primary path of the boat across the sky. The second motion is the monthly cycle of phases, which is also visible, and which is the growing and shrinking of the reflected light. But the third motion, she said, is the one nobody talks about. And the third motion is a slow drift. The drift, she said, was not in the same direction each night. It varied. Sometimes it was north, sometimes it was south, sometimes it was east, sometimes it was west. But over long periods of observation, over years of watching, a pattern emerged. The moon was, very slowly and very subtly, changing its arc. Not moving to a new arc all at once, the way the 5th tablet described the great shift after the fall of Ur, but moving in small increments, night by night, in a slow, deliberate correction that Enheduanna believed was intentional. And her theory of what the drift was for is the passage that has made the 7th tablet controversial for over 100 years, because Enheduanna wrote that the drift was an approach. She wrote that the moon was, over many centuries, slowly moving closer to a specific point in the sky. That point, she said, was fixed. It was not one of the stars she knew. It was not one of the constellations. It was a spot, an empty spot, a place with no visible object at all. But it was, she said, the place the moon was heading. And when the moon reached that place, she said, something would happen. Enheduanna did not speculate about what that thing would be. She was a scientist, in the ancient sense, and she confined herself to what she could observe. But she did calculate. She calculated the rate of the drift. She calculated the direction. She calculated the distance from the current position of the moon's arc to the destination point. And she calculated, based on those numbers, how long it would take the moon to arrive. The number she arrived at is the passage of the 7th tablet that has been debated most fiercely, because Enheduanna wrote a specific figure. And the figure, translated into modern years using the best current understanding of Sumerian numeric notation, works out to somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 of our years. From the date she recorded the calculation, that calculation was made in approximately the year 2200 before the Common Era, which places the arrival, according to Enheduanna's numbers, somewhere between 3,800 and 4,800 of our years from now. That is, sometime in what we would call the future, the near future, on cosmic scales. But not immediately, not in our lifetimes, not in the lifetimes of anyone alive today, but not far, either, within the arc of civilization, within the memory of what could still be called our era. Enheduanna wrote, in the entry that follows the calculation, I do not know what happens when he arrives. I do not know if it is good or bad, if it is a homecoming or a departure, if it is an ending or a beginning. I know only that he is going somewhere, that he has been going there for as long as the count has been running, and that when he arrives, the count will end. And what comes after the count is not the count. That is her sentence. What comes after the count is not the count. Before we move on to record 8, stop for a second. What you just heard only makes sense on the full timeline next to the 6 resets before it. Every arrival was scheduled. Every trace was written. It's all in the 7 resets, linked below. Grab it. Come back. What's next builds on it. QR code on screen. Enheduanna continued her observations for another decade after making that calculation. She refined it. She checked it against new data. She corrected small errors. The final version of the calculation, as it appears in the last entries of the compilation, gives a number that is slightly larger than her first estimate, by about 100 years. And this too has been debated, because it suggests either that she was correcting for observational imprecision, or that she was correcting for a subtle change in the rate of the drift itself. If the drift was accelerating, or decelerating, or wobbling, her later numbers would reflect that. And her later numbers, most scholars agree, do reflect it. They suggest a small but detectable deceleration. The moon, in her observations, was slowing down. Not slowing in its motion across the sky. That was constant. Slowing in its drift toward the destination point, as if it were approaching the target with care. As if it were, in the language of a much later age, decelerating for arrival. The last entry in the compilation is dated, according to internal references, to the year of Enheduanna's death. She was, by then, an old woman. She had been on the roof of the temple almost every night for over 40 years. And her final entry is short. It reads, "Tonight the moon is in the correct position for the count." The drift continues. "I will not be here to see him arrive, but someone will. And I hope, whoever they are, they know what they are looking at when they see it." That is the closing entry of the 7th tablet. And it is, in many ways, the closing entry of the classical Sumerian tradition of moon observation. Because the tablets that follow, the 8th, 9th, and 10th, are not the work of Sumerian priests. They are the work of Babylonian scribes, working many centuries later, in a different culture, in a different language, but preserving what they took to be the essential remaining records of the Sumerian moon tradition. They were, in effect, the archivists of a dying knowledge. They copied what they could. They preserved what they could preserve. And in 3 final tablets, they set down the last 3 great records of Nanna, in the form the Sumerians had left them, before the tradition was lost for good. The 8th tablet is the tablet of the 7 nights, and it takes us, for the first time, into a record that describes the moon not as a benefactor, not as a scheduler, not as a builder of temples, but as a warning. The 7 nights are 7 specific nights, spread across the count, on which the moon has behaved in unusual ways. And each of those nights, the tablet claims, was a signal of something coming. And the 7 signals, taken together, form a pattern that the Babylonian scribes did not fully understand, but that they preserved in the hope that someone in the future would. Record 8. The Tablet of the 7 Nights. The 8th tablet is the one that has attracted the most attention from the researchers we sometimes call the alternative historians, because it is the tablet that reads, on its face, like a checklist. A list of 7 specific nights, described in specific terms, with specific dates, and with the claim that these 7 nights, taken together, constitute a pattern that any careful observer of the sky could use to determine where in the count they are standing. The tablet was found in the ruins of the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, which is not a Sumerian site but an Assyrian one. Ashurbanipal, in the 7th century before the Common Era, made it his mission to collect and preserve every tablet of ancient knowledge he could find in the surviving temples of Mesopotamia. His scribes traveled to Ur, to Nippur, to Uruk, to Lagash, to every city that still had a functioning archive, and they copied whatever they could. They brought the copies back to Nineveh, and they arranged them in a great library, which was, when it was finally excavated in the 19th century of our era, the single greatest recovery of ancient texts in the history of archaeology. The 8th tablet is one of the treasures of that library. It is complete. It is well preserved. It is written in careful Babylonian cuneiform, though the content is unmistakably Sumerian in origin. And it opens with a preface that the Babylonian scribes added to explain to their contemporary readers what they were about to read. The preface says, "This tablet was found in the ruins of the temple of Nanna at Ur, in the 17th year of the reign of King Nabonidus of Babylon, who ordered the excavation of the ancient site for the purpose of recovering the lost knowledge of the moon. The tablet is a copy of an older tablet, made by scribes at the time of King Rimsin of Larsa, who ruled some 1400 years earlier than Nabonidus. The original tablet, from which the Rimsin copy was made, is estimated by the scribes of Nabonidus to date to the time of King Ur-Nammu of Ur, some 500 years earlier still. Which means, if the estimates are correct, that the original tablet was composed at least 1900 years before the copy we now possess. That original date places the composition of the Tablet of the Seven Nights in approximately the year 2100 before the Common Era, which is roughly the same period as Enheduanna's astronomical diary, which suggests, and some scholars have argued this at length, that the Tablet of the Seven Nights may in fact be a companion document to the diary, that the 7 nights it describes may be 7 specific nights that Enheduanna herself observed, and that the tablet is, in effect, her interpretation of the meaning of those nights. We cannot prove this. The tablet does not name its author, but the connection is plausible, and the details are consistent, and the language of the tablet has the same careful observational quality that runs through the diary. Whoever wrote it was someone who had spent a very long time watching the sky, and who had learned to distinguish signal from noise, and who was writing not to persuade, but to record. Let me walk you through the 7 nights, one at a time, in the order they appear in the tablet. The first night is called the Night of the Two Moons. The tablet says that on a specific night, which it dates to the 14th night of a specific month in a specific year, the moon was in the sky in its usual position, at its usual phase, which was a waxing gibbous, and that in addition to the moon in its usual position, a second moon was visible in the sky at a different position. The tablet describes the second moon as smaller than the first, dimmer than the first, and at a lower elevation. It says the second moon was visible for approximately 3 hours, from the middle of the night until shortly before dawn, and that it moved across the sky in an arc that was not parallel to the arc of the first moon, but was tilted at a shallow angle as if it were on a slightly different plane. The tablet says the observers who saw it initially thought it was a reflection, an atmospheric effect, some kind of trick of the light. But when they compared observations from different vantage points, from the roof of the temple in Ur and from the roof of the temple in Uruk, which were about 50 of our miles apart, they found that the second moon appeared at slightly different positions in the sky, depending on where you were standing, which meant it was real. It was a physical object, in the actual sky, at a measurable distance, seen with parallax the way any nearby object is seen. The observers, the tablet says, watched it for the 3 hours it was visible. They noted its position, they noted its motion, they noted its color, which they described as slightly bluer than the first moon, and its light, which they described as slightly steadier. And when it disappeared below the horizon before dawn, they waited. They watched the sky the next night. They watched the night after that, and the second moon did not return. It appeared once, it behaved as it behaved, and then it was gone. The tablet notes that this was the first of the 7 nights. It gives no interpretation. It simply records what happened, and marks the date, and moves on. The second night is called the Night of the Ring. The tablet says that on another specific night, again dated precisely, the moon rose in its usual position, at its usual phase, which was full, and that around the moon, as it climbed into the sky, a ring appeared, not the ordinary lunar halo that any observer might see on a humid night. A specific, sharp, well-defined ring of light, separated from the moon by a measurable distance, and containing, the tablet says, 7 distinct points of brightness distributed around its circumference at equal intervals. The 7 points, the tablet notes with some emphasis, were not stars. They were not visible before the ring appeared, and they were not visible after it disappeared. They existed only for the duration of the ring, which was approximately 2 hours, from the time the moon reached its highest point in the sky until it began its descent. During those 2 hours, the ring was steady. The 7 points were steady. They did not twinkle. They did not move relative to the ring. They rotated with the ring as the moon moved across the sky, holding their positions in a fixed geometric pattern. The tablet says that the priests on the roof of the temple, when they saw this, immediately recognized the arrangement. It was the same arrangement described in the first tablet as the arrangement of the 7 attendants of Nanna. The one who opens the gate at the top, the one who reads the count to the right, the one who holds the light to the lower right, and so on, around the circle, in the order the first tablet had listed them. The ring, the priest concluded, was a display, a signal, a statement made by the moon that all 7 attendants were present, that the boat was fully crewed, and that the crew was ready. Ready for what? The tablet does not say. But the observation was recorded, and the date was marked, and the second of the 7 nights was entered into the count. The third night is called the Night of the Silence. The tablet says that on this night, the moon rose at its usual time, in its usual position, at its usual phase. But it made no sound. Now this is a strange thing to say, because the moon does not, in ordinary experience, make any sound at all. It is silent by default. Nobody has ever heard a sound from the moon. So what does it mean for a specific night to be called the night of the silence? The tablet explains, it says that on ordinary nights, if you climb to the roof of the temple of Nanna at and you sit very still, and you close your eyes, and you listen with great attention, you can hear a very faint sound coming from the direction of the moon. Not a loud sound, not a sound anyone would notice unless they were specifically listening for it, but a sound, a low hum, a steady vibration in the air, almost below the threshold of hearing, but not quite. Any priest who had trained on the roof for a long time could learn to hear it. And once you heard it, you could always hear it. On any clear night, in any phase, except on this one night. The night of the silence, when the sound stopped, the moon was in its usual position. The sky was clear. The night was quiet in the ordinary sense, without wind or distant sounds from the city. But the low hum, which had been there every previous night, was gone. And it remained gone for the full length of the night, from moonrise to moonset. Complete silence, in the direction where the sound had always been. The priests, the tablet says, were shaken. They compared observations. They confirmed with the other temples, in the other cities, that the silence was general, not local. Everywhere the moon could be seen, the hum was gone. And the next morning, at dawn, when the sun rose and the moon set, the priests waited for the following night with anxiety. Because if the silence continued, they did not know what it would mean. But the following night, the tablet says, the hum returned. It came back exactly as it had been. Steady, low, almost imperceptible. And every night after that, for many years, the hum was present. The silence was a single event. One night. One anomaly. Recorded, dated, marked as the third of the 7, and the tablet moves on. The fourth night is called the Night of the Red Light. The tablet says that on this night, the moon rose in its usual position, but its color was wrong. The moon, normally a pale silver, was on this night a deep red, not the coppery red of a lunar eclipse, which the Sumerians knew and had names for and did not consider unusual. A different red, a darker red, almost the color of dried blood, and the redness lasted from moonrise until moonset. The entire night, not the brief passage through the Earth's shadow that gives an eclipse its color. A full night, from horizon to horizon, of red moon. The tablet notes that there was no eclipse that night. The tablet notes that the sky was clear. The tablet notes that the redness was uniform across the disk of the moon, not concentrated in a shadow or a band. The redness was simply the color the moon chose to be, on that one night, and the observers on the roof of the temple recorded it with the same careful notation they used for everything else. The moon was red. It was red for the full night. It returned to its normal color the following night, and nobody, the tablet says, has ever explained why. The Babylonian scribes who copied the tablet added a small marginal note here, in a slightly different hand from the main text. The note says, "In the reign of the current king, in the 3rd year of his rule, the same phenomenon occurred. The moon was red for a full night, without eclipse. The priests of Babylon recorded it. The dates match, in the count, with the interval predicted between the 4th night and any recurrence, if the pattern is stable. Consider this confirmation. That marginal note has been the subject of tremendous scholarly attention, because it implies that the pattern of the 7 nights is not just a historical record. It is a predictive schema. The nights recur. They recur on a calculable interval. And the Babylonian scribes, watching for them, saw at least one of them repeat during their own lifetimes on the date the schema predicted, which suggests, at minimum, that the underlying phenomenon is real. Something is causing these anomalies. And whatever is causing them is not random. It is scheduled. The 5th night is called the Night of the 2 Shadows. This is one of the strangest of the 7, and the tablet describes it with unusual care, as if the scribe were aware that the reader would have difficulty believing it. The tablet says that on this night, the moon rose in its usual position, at its usual phase, in its usual color. But the light it cast on the ground was wrong. Specifically, the shadows were wrong. Every object on the ground, illuminated by the moonlight, cast 2 shadows instead of 1. The 2 shadows, the tablet says, were at slightly different angles. One shadow pointed in the direction one would expect, given the position of the moon in the sky. The other shadow pointed in a direction that would have required a second light source, at a slightly different angle from the first. But there was no second light source visible in the sky. There was only the moon. And yet the shadows were as if there were two moons, casting light from two different directions, though only one was visible. The observers on the roof of the temple, the tablet says, immediately connected this to the night of the two moons, which had occurred years earlier. They wondered whether the second moon of the first night was still present, invisible now, but still casting light. They tried to see it. They looked in the direction the second shadow implied a light source. They saw nothing. But the shadows, they said, did not lie. Something was there. It was casting light. It was not visible. And it was, from its inferred position, exactly where the second moon had been on the first night. The tablet notes that the two shadows persisted for the full night, that the pattern was consistent, that every object with a defined edge cast two shadows at the same relative angles, regardless of where in the field of view it was, and that the following night, the shadows returned to normal. One moon, one shadow, as always. The Babylonian scribes did not add a marginal note here. They apparently had not seen this one recur in their own time. The sixth night is called the night of the written sky. The tablet says that on this night, the stars in the sky arranged themselves into writing. Not a pattern that resembled writing. Actual writing. Sumerian cuneiform, made of stars, visible for the length of 1 hour, between the middle of the night and the middle of the second half of the night, and legible to anyone on the ground who knew how to read. Now this is the point in the tablet where the reader must decide what kind of document is being described. Because if we take the tablet literally, at this point, we are being told that on a specific night, at a specific hour, the constellations reconfigured themselves into readable text, and that the priests on the ground read the text, and that the text said something specific. That is what the tablet claims. And the tablet then quotes the text. The text, the tablet says, was short. It consisted of 3 lines. And the 3 lines, translated as literally as possible, read as follows. The count is proceeding. The end approaches. Do not forget, that was the message. Written in stars, across the sky, for 1 hour, on one night. Then, at the end of the hour, the stars, the tablet says, resumed their normal positions. The writing was gone, and it has never returned. But the priests wrote down the 3 lines. They wrote them down that same night, before they could be forgotten, passed them down. They copied them. They made sure that the words survived, even if the writing in the sky did not. The Babylonian scribe here adds another marginal note. This one is longer. It says, the 3 lines have been preserved in every generation. They are known to every priest of every moon temple in every city of the plain. They are recited in the 7th year of every 7-year cycle, at the festival of the count. And they have been recited without interruption for 19 centuries, and they will be recited for as long as the priesthood endures. Whoever reads this tablet in a future age, when the priesthood is gone, should know that the 3 lines were said and were remembered and were carried forward, exactly as they were written in the sky, without alteration. The 7th night is called the night of the open door. And this is the last of the 7, and it is the one that gives the tablet its final weight. Because the tablet says that on this night, the moon rose in its usual position, at its usual phase, and at its usual color. Everything was normal. Except that on this one night, the moon opened. The tablet says that at the moment the moon reached its highest point in the sky, a line of light appeared across its face. Not a shadow, not a mark. A line. Bright, vertical, running from the top of the disk to the bottom, and the line, over the course of about a quarter of an hour, widened. It became a gap, a slit, through which, the tablet says, the observers on the roof of the temple could see into the interior of the moon, and what they saw inside the moon was not what they expected. They expected, the tablet notes, either darkness or fire. They had grown up hearing the stories from the first tablet, of the boat of light with the pilot inside, and they assumed that if the boat ever opened, they would see either the pilot or the light. What they saw, when the slit opened wide enough to see through, was neither. What they saw was another sky. A sky with stars in different positions. A sky with a different quality of light. A sky that was not the sky above them, but was a sky nonetheless. As if the interior of the moon were not a solid interior at all, but was a window into somewhere else. The tablet describes what the priests saw through the window as best it can. It describes stars they did not recognize. It describes a color of the void between the stars that was not the black of night, but was a deep violet, almost purple, that seemed to shimmer slightly. And it describes, most puzzlingly, A shape moving in the sky behind the stars. A large shape. Vast. Slow. Passing across the field of view of the window over the course of the quarter of an hour that the door was open. The shape did not have clear edges. It was more like a suggestion of something enormous, moving in the far distance, that could be perceived only by the way the stars around it were dimmed as it passed. The observers watched. They did not speak. They did not move. They understood, the tablet says, that they were seeing something that had not been shown to any generation before them, and that would not be shown to any generation after them, and that whatever it was not meant to be described in words. It was meant to be seen. Then the slit began to close. The line of light narrowed. The window disappeared. The face of the moon resumed its normal appearance. And the seventh night was over. The tablet ends with a passage that the Babylonian scribes preserved in what they identified as the original Sumerian, without translation, because they did not want to risk introducing errors. The Sumerian passage has been translated many times in modern scholarship, and the translations differ in details but agree on the essential content. The passage reads, 7 nights have been given, 7 signals have been shown, each one confirms the count, each one marks the position, each one tells the watcher where in the great cycle the sky now stands. The first night is the beginning. The 7th night is not the end, but is the last warning before the end. When the 7th night has been seen, the next event is the arrival. Between the 7th night and the arrival, there is time. Not much time, but enough for the temple to be prepared. Enough for the count to be checked. Enough for the door to be found and made ready. When the arrival comes, the door will open a second time. And what steps through it will not be the same as what stepped down at the first descent. It will be the same person, but it will be different, because the count will have changed him, as the count has changed everything. The priests who read this must know. The 7 nights have been counted. The final night has been seen, not by you, by your ancestors, by the last generation of the Temple of Ur, before it fell, and the time between the 7th night and the arrival is now not a matter of centuries. It is a matter of decades, perhaps less. Prepare. Now sit with that for a moment, because the tablet is saying, in plain language, that the 7 nights are not merely a historical record. They are a timer, and the timer has already rung. The 7th night has already occurred, not in our lifetimes, in the lifetime of the priests of the last generation of the Temple of Ur before the fall, which places the 7th night, if the tablet is accurate, somewhere in the 21st or 20th century before the Common Era, which places the arrival, if the tablet's warning is accurate, somewhere on the order of decades or centuries later, which places the arrival, on our own calendar, somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 years ago. Now that raises an obvious question. If the arrival was supposed to happen between 2,000 and 4,000 years ago, why do we not have a record of it? Why does the sky look normal to us? Why has the moon not opened again? Why are we still here? Still counting? Still living in a world that seems, superficially at least, to be running on the schedule that was installed at the end of the first tablet? There are 3 possibilities. The first is that the tablet is wrong, that the Babylonian scribes made an error in transcription, or that Enheduanna miscalculated, or that the schema was never accurate, that the 7 nights were 7 coincidences, and the pattern was imagined by observers desperate for meaning, and the warning was a fantasy. The second possibility is that the arrival did happen, and we simply do not recognize it, that the moon did open, at some point between 2,000 and 4,000 years ago, and that whatever stepped out of it walked among the peoples of the ancient world, and that our histories, our religions, our founding stories, all in one way or another remember it. But we no longer connect the memory to the moon. Under this reading, every founding figure of every subsequent religion, every prophet, every savior, every avatar, every incarnation is a description of the same event refracted through the memory of different cultures who did not know what they were witnessing. The third possibility is that the arrival has not yet happened, that the count is longer than the Babylonian scribes estimated, that the 7th night occurred, but the timer that runs from it to the arrival is measured in units they did not fully understand, and that the arrival is still ahead of us, not centuries ahead, not millennia ahead, but not immediately, somewhere in the near future, close enough to be worth watching for, far enough that no living person will necessarily see it, but within the arc of the count that is now still running. The 8th tablet does not tell us which of these 3 possibilities is correct. It gives us the 7 nights, it gives us the warning, and it leaves us, as every good ancient record does, with more questions than it answers. But it establishes, more clearly than any of the previous tablets, that the Sumerians believed the moon was on a timer, that the timer had specific milestones, that the milestones could be observed, that the observations could be dated, and that from the pattern of the milestones, a person could, in principle, determine how close the end of the count was. Whether that is true, whether the milestones were real, whether the tablet is a record of actual observations or a theological fabrication, we cannot say. But the fact that the record exists, that it is this specific, that it names 7 specific nights with 7 specific descriptions, and that the descriptions include phenomena that we cannot easily explain even now, is worth carrying with you into the 9th tablet. Because the 9th tablet, in a very different way, comes back to the same theme. Record 9. The Tablet of the Great Eclipse. The 9th tablet is the shortest of the 10 in terms of the number of surviving lines, but it may be the most consequential in terms of what it claims. It is the tablet that describes what the Sumerians believed had happened during a specific total lunar eclipse that occurred. According to the internal dating of the tablet, in a year that modern astronomical calculations have identified with some confidence, that year corresponds, on our calendar, to approximately the 23rd century before the Common Era, which places the eclipse itself in a period that is well within the reign of Naram-Sin, whose story we heard in the 4th tablet, and possibly just before or during the events of the Curse of Agade. The tablet opens with a preface, again added by the Babylonian scribes, that identifies the source. It says the tablet was copied from a fragment recovered from the ruins of the temple of Nanna at Eridu, which was the oldest of the Sumerian cities, older even than Ur, and which had been abandoned for over 1,000 years by the time the Babylonian scribes came to copy the fragment. The fragment was found in a sealed chamber beneath the sanctuary. The chamber contained nothing else, just the fragment, placed carefully in the center of the chamber, on a small stone platform, wrapped in linen that had partially decomposed. Whoever had sealed the fragment there had done so, the scribes concluded, with the specific intention of preserving it against a catastrophe. And that catastrophe, whatever it was, had come and gone, and the fragment had survived, and the Babylonians had recovered it. The content of the tablet begins with a straightforward astronomical description. It says that in a specific year, on a specific date, the moon was to enter a total eclipse. The eclipse was predicted well in advance by the priests, because the Sumerians had, by that point, developed a reliable understanding of the lunar cycle, and could calculate eclipses years or decades ahead. The date of the predicted eclipse was known. The priests had prepared for it. They had assembled on the roofs of the temples in every major city. They had lit the ceremonial fires. They had begun the chants that were performed during every lunar eclipse to ask Nanna to return from the shadows safely and to resume the count. The eclipse began as predicted. The moon entered the Earth's shadow. It darkened. It turned the deep, coppery red that lunar eclipses produce. The priests continued their chants. The observers noted the times. Everything, for the first hour of the eclipse, proceeded normally. Then the tablet describes what happened at the moment of totality, when the moon was fully within the shadow. And what happened, it says, is that the moon did not stay dark. Instead, the moon began to glow, not with the reflected coppery light of the Earth's shadow, which is normal, with a light of its own, a cold light, a blue-white light. A light, the tablet says, that came from inside the moon, as if the moon were a lamp that had, until that moment, been reflecting the sun's light and was now, in the absence of the sun's light, being lit from within by its own source. The tablet describes the color as unforgettable. It says it was the same color as Nanna's staff in the descriptions from the first tablet. It says it was the same color as the light inside the boat. It says it was the color the priests had been told in their training was the true color of the moon, before the reflected sunlight covered it. And that during the total eclipse, when the sunlight was blocked, the true color emerged for the first time in living memory. The tablet says the priests, when they saw this, understood immediately what they were looking at. They were looking at the moon as it really was. Not as a reflector, not as a passive body, as a source of a specific kind of light that was not the light of the sun. And they realized, in that moment, that everything they had assumed about the moon was wrong in one important respect. The moon was not shining because the sun was shining on it. The moon was shining because the moon was shining. The sun's light was a mask, a layer, a camouflage. The true light of the moon was blue-white and cold, and it was visible only when the sun's light was removed, which, in the ordinary course of the cycle, never happened, except during total lunar eclipses, which occurred, on average, once every few years. The priests, the tablet says, then did something remarkable. They stayed silent. They did not chant. They did not perform the rituals they had been trained to perform during the eclipse. They simply watched. And they watched together in every city on the plain for the full length of the totality, which lasted approximately 1.5 hours. And during that time, the tablet says, the true moon was visible to the entire Sumerian world. Every priest, every farmer, every child, every soldier, every king, everyone who was awake, on that specific night, in that specific hour, saw the moon as it really was. And then, at the end of the totality, the Earth's shadow began to withdraw. The sun's light began to touch the edge of the moon again. The coppery red returned briefly. The blue-white light dimmed, and within a few minutes, the moon looked exactly as it always looked, the pale silver that the Sumerians and every subsequent culture had grown up seeing. The mask was back in place. The true light was hidden again. And the eclipse ended, and the count resumed. But something had shifted, not in the sky, on the ground. The priests of Eridu, the oldest priesthood on the plain, held a council within days of the eclipse. They sent messengers to to Uruk, to Nippur, to Lagash, to every city that had a functioning temple of Nanna. And they asked, in the messages, a single question. What color did you see at the moment of totality? The answers came back over the following weeks. Every city, without exception, reported the same color. Blue-white, cold, from inside the moon, not reflected, sourced. The priests of Eridu then held a second council, and in this council, they made a decision. The decision was that the true nature of the moon, as revealed by the eclipse, was too important to be lost. It could not be trusted to the ordinary channels of temple training, because those channels could be interrupted by war, by famine, by conquest, by the collapse of civilization. What if the temples fell? What if the priests were killed? What if the training was broken? The knowledge that the moon had a light of its own, an inner light, would be lost. And then, when the next eclipse came, and the next generation of priests saw the blue-white light, they would not know what they were seeing. They would not have the context. They would not have the framework of understanding that the current priesthood had inherited. So the priests of Eridu decided to write it down, to make a record, to seal it in a stone chamber beneath the sanctuary of the temple, where it would survive any catastrophe, and to instruct the priests of every subsequent generation to seek out the sealed chamber if the temple fell and to recover the record. The 9th tablet is that record, or rather, the 9th tablet is a Babylonian copy of a fragment of that record made after the fragment was recovered from the ruins of Eridu, approximately 1,500 years after it was originally sealed. Whoever wrote the original record intended it for exactly this purpose: to survive, to be found, to be read by a generation that did not know what the moon really was. And the record, in its central passage, makes a specific claim. It says, "The moon is not a mirror. The moon is a lamp. The lamp is normally covered by a screen. The screen is the light of the sun, which falls on the outside of the moon and creates the reflection we call moonlight. When the screen is removed, as during a total eclipse, the lamp is visible. The lamp is blue-white. The lamp is cold. The lamp is powered by something inside the moon, something we do not understand, something that has been operating since the first descent, and something that will operate until the count ends. When the count ends, the lamp will change. Its color will change. Its brightness will change. And on the night of the change, whoever is watching the sky will know that the count is over." That is the central claim of the 9th tablet, that the moon has an inner light, that the inner light is normally masked by the reflection of the sun, that the mask is removed during total eclipses, revealing the inner light, and that the inner light itself is a kind of countdown display. Its color and brightness are not fixed. They evolve, slowly, over the length of the count. And at the end of the count, they will complete their evolution, and the completion will be visible. The tablet then describes what the priests believe the completion would look like. It says the blue-white color, at the end of the count, will begin to shift. It will move gradually toward gold. Not the pale gold of a harvest moon, which is an atmospheric effect the Sumerians understood and did not consider unusual. A deeper gold, an internal gold, as if the lamp itself were changing its temperature, as if it were heating up. And the tablet says that as the color shifts, the brightness will also increase. The lamp will become over time brighter, and the brightness will not be visible to ordinary observers, because the mask of the sun's reflection will hide it, but it will be visible to observers who watch during eclipses. And the sequence of colors seen during successive total lunar eclipses, the tablet says, will constitute a countdown, the blue-white of the first observed eclipse, the blue-white with a hint of gold, of a later eclipse, the pale gold, of a later still, the full gold, of the eclipse before the end, and the white, the pure, blinding white, of the last eclipse before the arrival. The tablet then makes a claim that has been the source of intense debate among researchers of the Sumerian corpus for over a century. It claims that at the moment of the eclipse recorded in the tablet itself, the color of the inner light was pure blue-white. It gives a specific description. It says the color was the color of frost at dawn, or the color of the eye of the mountain glacier, or the color of the deepest layer of a lightning strike. All Sumerian terms for a specific shade of white that has a strong blue undertone. And the tablet says that this color, this specific color, was the starting color, the color of the beginning of the countdown. The color the moon showed at the first eclipse observed by trained priests back at the founding of the observatory at Eridu, which was many centuries before Naram-Sin's reign. Which means the tablet implies that the eclipse of Naram-Sin's era was not the first observation. It was a confirmation observation. It was a check. The priests of Eridu, the original priests, had established the color at the first observation. The priests of later generations had, in each subsequent eclipse, verified that the color remained blue-white, or, more precisely, whether the color had begun to shift. And in the eclipse recorded in the tablet, they were checking, once again, whether the shift had begun. And the answer, in this eclipse, was that the shift had not yet begun. The color was still blue-white, still frost at dawn, still the eye of the mountain glacier. No hint of gold, no shift toward heat. The countdown, in other words, was still in its early phase. The end was not close. But the tablet then adds a small closing observation, and this is the observation that carries the weight of the entire ninth record. It says, "At the very edge of the disk, at the very rim of the visible lamp, there was a suggestion, a hint, a trace of warmth, not a color shift you could measure, not a change you could name, but something, as if the frost, at the edges, were beginning, faintly, to melt." The priests recorded this. They noted the position, on the rim, where the trace was most visible. They estimated its intensity. They calculated, based on the intensity, how long it would take for the trace to spread across the full disk of the moon and for the full color shift to begin. And their estimate, according to the tablet, was that the shift would begin sometime between 1,000 and 2,000 of our years after the eclipse they were observing, which places the beginning of the shift, on our calendar, somewhere between the year 1000 of the Common Era and the year 2000 of the Common Era, which is now, which is exactly our time. That is the claim of the ninth tablet, that the total lunar eclipses of our current era, if we knew how to look at them, if we had the training to observe the inner light and to distinguish its color and to measure its temperature, would show us that the shift has begun, that the frost is melting, that the lamp is warming, and that the countdown, whatever its total length, is now in its final phase. Now, most modern scholars would dismiss this as ancient superstition. There is no measurable inner light of the moon. There is no blue-white glow during total lunar eclipses. The coppery red we see is entirely explicable by the physics of the Earth's atmosphere, refracting sunlight around the Earth and casting the tinted light onto the moon's surface. Nothing about the moon requires an inner lamp, an internal power source, a countdown display. The ninth tablet is, from the perspective of standard science, either a fabrication or a misinterpretation. It is, at best, a beautiful myth. At worst, a confused rationalization of an atmospheric phenomenon. But the tablet is very specific. It gives colors. It gives comparisons. It gives a described sequence of color shifts over time. And what is interesting, if you are willing to entertain the possibility, is that a very small number of amateur astronomers, over the past century, have reported observing, during total lunar eclipses, something they cannot quite name. A quality of the red coppery light that has, they say, a subtle underlayer, a slight warmth, something that shifts if you watch it long enough, something that a person trained in the tradition of the ninth tablet, if such training still existed, might recognize as the trace of gold beneath the frost. Whether that is confirmation of the tablet, or projection, or coincidence, we cannot say. But the tablet is on record. It has been on record for 2,500 years in the Babylonian copy, and for 4,500 years if we accept the original composition date. And its central claim, unchanging across all that time, is that the moon is a lamp, that the lamp is masked, and that the lamp is a countdown, and that the countdown is now, on the time scale the original priests calculated, entering its final phase. Read the ninth tablet however you want, as history, as myth, as prophecy, as poetry. But do not read it without noticing that it is written by observers, and that the observers were careful, and that they said what they said with a specific and unusual level of precision. They said the moon has a light of its own. They said the light is blue-white. They said the light will change color as the count ends. They said the change will be visible during total lunar eclipses. And they said the change is now beginning, or is very close to beginning, on the calendar we are currently living in. The tablet ends with a single closing line. It says, "Watch the eclipses. Learn the colors. Remember the frost. When the frost turns to gold, prepare." Record 10. The Sealing. The 10th and final tablet is the one the Sumerian tradition called simply the Sealing. It is the last of the 10 records. It is the shortest in surviving line count, though the fragmentary state of some passages means we may be missing significant portions. It was recovered from the ruins of the temple of Nanna at Ur, in a sealed clay pot that had been buried in the foundations of the sanctuary during the final reconstruction of the temple in the reign of the last king of Ur before the fall. Whoever buried it did so with the intention that it would not be found until the temple was completely destroyed. It was a message to the future. A message that said, in effect, if you are reading this, the temple is gone, and the Sumerian world is over, and what remains is only this tablet, and whatever it says. What it says is that Nanna is leaving, that the moon we currently see in our sky is not the moon that first descended, that the original moon, the boat of light with the pilot inside, departed at the end of a specific count, and that what remains, what we look at now, what our modern astronomy studies, is the shell, the residue, the empty vehicle, which continues to orbit, which continues to reflect sunlight, which continues to appear to us as our familiar companion in the night sky, but which is, in the language of the tablet, empty. That is the central claim of the 10th tablet. The moon we have now is not the moon the Sumerians described in the first 9. The Sumerian moon left. The pilot is gone. The boat is unmanned, and the count that was installed at the first descent is running on autopilot, continuing without a driver, because the driver has completed his tour and returned to wherever he came from. Let me walk you through the tablet in order. It opens with a scene inside the boat of light. Nanna is speaking to his 7 attendants. They are gathered in a chamber the tablet calls the counting room, which we have not seen before in the previous 9 tablets, but which is described here as a specific interior space within the boat where the count is kept in some kind of physical form. There are, the tablet says, 7 columns in the counting room, 1 for each attendant, and on each column there are markings that record the passage of the nights. Nanna is standing at the center. His attendants are at their columns, and he is telling them that the count is nearly complete. The tablet does not give a specific number. It does not tell us how many nights have passed since the first descent, or how many remain. It says only that the count is nearly complete, and that the moment of completion, when it comes, will not be predictable to the attendants themselves. The final count, Nanna tells them, will be triggered by a signal from outside, from the source of the count, from wherever Enlil is now, which the tablet does not specify but which is implied to be very far away, and which the boat has been out of contact with since the departure from Nippur in the 3rd tablet. The signal will come, the count will end, and when the count ends, the boat will do what it was designed to do at the end. What was it designed to do? The tablet answers, in a passage that I will read to you word for word, because it is one of the strangest passages in the entire Sumerian corpus. Nanna says, "When the signal comes, the boat will separate. The shell will remain in its arc, continuing to reflect the light of the sun, continuing to move in the fixed path that has been calibrated for it, continuing to appear to the men of the plain as the moon they have always known. But the inner boat, the true boat, the boat that carries the count and the crew and the light, will detach. It will leave the shell. It will rise. It will pass through the opening in the sky, which will open once more, briefly, at the moment of the detachment, and it will return to the source, to Enlil, to wherever the count began. And whatever needs to be reported will be reported, and whatever needs to be judged will be judged, and whatever needs to be decided will be decided. Not by me, by the source. And the men of the plain," Nanna continues, "will not know that anything has changed. They will look up at the shell in the sky, and they will see the moon, and they will not see any difference. The reflected light will still fall on the fields. The tides, which the shell continues to pull as long as it remains in orbit, will still rise and fall. The calendar, which was tied to the phases of the shell, will still function, though its meaning will now be empty. The men of the plain will continue to count, but the count will no longer be watched. The count will no longer be counted for a reason. The count will simply be running mechanically on the momentum of the schedule that was installed at the beginning until, eventually, the schedule wears out. The attendants ask Nanna how long that will take. How long, they ask, will the shell continue to reflect and to orbit and to pull the tides after the inner boat has departed? Nanna's answer, in the tablet, is disturbingly specific. He says the shell will continue for approximately the same length of time it has already been in the sky. The count that has passed from the first descent to the departure will be roughly matched by the count that follows from the departure to the final decay of the shell. And at the end of that following count, the shell will fall. The tablet then describes what the fall will look like. It says the shell, over the course of the second count, will slowly wobble more. Its arc will drift. Its orbit will decay. Its light will dim slightly as the reflective properties of its outer surface degrade. And in the final centuries of the second count, it will begin to fragment. Small pieces will break off. They will fall to the earth as streaks of light, what we would call meteor showers, which are already, the tablet implies, in some sense pieces of the shell breaking away. And in the final generation of the second count, the shell will lose enough mass that its orbit will collapse. It will spiral down, and it will strike the earth. Where will it strike? The tablet does not know, but it says that the strike will not be gentle. The shell is large. Its mass is significant. When it comes down, it will destroy a substantial portion of the plain, and the impact will change the weather. And the change in weather will alter the climate, and the alteration of the climate will end the age of men that was made possible by the schedule Nanna installed at the beginning. That, the tablet says, is the plan. That is what the boat was designed to do. It was designed to install the count. It was designed to keep the count for a specific period. It was designed to detach at the end of that period and to return to the source. And it was designed to leave behind a shell that would continue to appear in the sky, that would continue to fool the men of the plain into thinking the moon was still there, but that would, over a matched second count, wear out and fall. And when it fell, it would end the age of men that had begun with its arrival. The 7 attendants listen to Nanna as he explains all of this. They do not ask why. They do not ask what the point of the age of men was, if it was scheduled to end at a fixed date all along. They do not ask what happens to the men after the shell falls. These are questions that the tablet, in its remaining passages, does not raise. It is a technical document. It is describing an operation. It is not a philosophical discourse on the meaning of that operation. What matters, for the purposes of the tablet, is that the operation is nearly complete, and that the details of the completion be recorded before the boat departs. The tablet then describes the moment of the signal. It says the signal came, though the tablet does not specify how. It was not a sound. It was not a light. It was a shift in the count itself. A moment when the columns in the counting room, which had been marked with the accumulated tally of every night since the first descent, suddenly reset. The markings did not disappear. The nights had still occurred. But the columns showed, in that instant, the number 0. And the attendants understood. The count was complete. The signal had come. The detachment was to begin. Nanna, the tablet says, went first to Ningal. He passed close to her fixed position, closer than he had ever passed. He slowed the boat. He held it beside her for what the tablet calls a moment of unmeasured length, which is a Sumerian idiom for an instant that felt long. And he said goodbye. The tablet gives the words of the farewell in a very simple form, just 3 lines. He said, "I have kept the count. I am called back. I will remember you." And Ningal, the tablet says, brightened. Not the ordinary brightening of the passing, which was small and could be missed by a distracted observer, but a full brightening. Her light doubled and then tripled, and for a brief moment she was the second brightest object in the sky after the sun. And she said back to him, "I have held my position. I have watched you pass. I will remember you." Then Nanna, the tablet says, turned the boat away from her and toward the opening in the sky. The opening had begun to appear. The tablet describes it in the same terms the first tablet used, though now in reverse. The sky, above the boat, was starting to split. A line was appearing. The line was widening. It was becoming a gap, and through the gap, the boat could see the space beyond the sky, which was not the space of the stars, but was a different space, and from which, at the first descent, Nanna had originally come. The 7 attendants took their positions. The one who opens the gate stood at the front of the inner boat. The one who reads the count checked the columns one last time and confirmed that all counts were 0. The one who holds the light raised the staff of the bright metal. The one who marks the path adjusted the arc of the inner boat away from the shell. The one who records the names, whose function had been implicit throughout the previous 9 tablets and is here made explicit, held up a rolled sheet of the same strange material Nanna had shown Gudea in the dream. And on that sheet, the tablet says, were the names of every human being who had lived and died and been remembered during the entire count. Every man, every woman, every child. Millions of names, held on a single sheet, made of a material that could hold them all. The one who guards the silence stood at the door of the inner boat, ensuring that no sound from outside would enter, and no sound from inside would leave at the moment of separation. And the 7th attendant, the one who was not seen, remained in his place at the very back of the boat, where he had remained for the entire count, and where he was to remain for the return journey. Then the detachment began. The tablet describes it in a passage that reads more like an engineering log than like a myth. The inner boat, it says, disengaged from the outer shell along a specific seam. The seam ran around the circumference of the boat at the point where the pilot's chamber met the outer hull. The disengagement was mechanical and quiet. There was no explosion. There was no dramatic separation. The two halves simply came apart in the same slow, controlled way that they had originally been joined. The inner boat, once separated, began to rise. The shell, the outer hull, remained in its arc. It continued its motion. It continued to reflect the sunlight that fell on its outer surface. To any observer on the ground, at that moment, nothing had changed. The moon was still in the sky. It was still the correct shape. It was still moving in the correct arc. Nothing had visibly happened. But the inner boat, the tablet says, was already rising. It rose slowly at first, then faster. It passed through the atmosphere, which the tablet describes as a resistance that grew weaker as the boat climbed. It reached the height of the stars, where there was no resistance at all, and it reached the opening in the sky, which was fully open by then, waiting for it. The boat passed through the opening. It disappeared from the sky of the men of the plain. And the opening, the tablet says, closed behind it, that was the departure. And the tablet gives a date for it. The date is expressed in the Sumerian calendar system, which is difficult to convert precisely into our own, but the best available scholarly translations place it somewhere in the 15th or 14th century before the Common Era, which is, notably, the period during which the classical Sumerian civilization went into its final collapse, which is, notably, the period after which no new Nanna tablets were composed, which is, notably, the period after which the great tradition of Sumerian moon observation ended, and the Babylonian tradition, which was a second-hand transmission of what the Sumerians had known, began. The tablet says that after the departure, the shell continued in its arc, as designed. It says the men of the plain did not notice anything. The moon was still there, in the sky, in the correct position, at the correct phase. The calendar continued to run, the tides continued to rise and fall, the festivals continued to be observed, though the priests of in a passage that has been debated, are said to have felt something change on the night of the departure, without knowing what. Some ancient sources record that on that specific night, in the 15th or 14th century before the Common Era, the priests of felt a coldness they could not explain, and reported it to the temple archives, and the report is preserved in a fragment that many scholars have connected to the 10th tablet as an independent confirmation of the date. Whether the connection is real, we cannot say. But the pattern the 10th tablet establishes is clear. The pilot left. The shell continued. The men on the ground could not tell the difference. And the count that we currently observe, the calendar that we currently keep, the phases of the moon that we currently plan our lives around, is a count that is running on the momentum of a schedule that was installed by a pilot who is no longer here. The schedule continues. It will continue until the shell falls. And when the shell falls, the schedule ends, and the age it defined ends, and what comes next is not addressed in the 10th tablet, because the 10th tablet was not written for what comes next. It was written for us, for those of us living in the age of the empty shell, to let us know that what we are looking at when we look at the moon is not what we think we are looking at. The 10th tablet closes with a passage that has been the source of an enormous amount of religious and philosophical commentary over the centuries. It is the passage that the Sumerians called the final instruction. It is directed at whoever reads the tablet. It is not decorative. It is not poetic. It is a set of practical directions for how to live in the age of the empty shell. And it reads as follows. Do not worship the shell. The shell is not the moon. The shell is what the moon left behind when the moon returned home. Do not curse the shell. The shell is not to blame for anything. It is doing what it was designed to do. It is holding its arc. It is reflecting the sun. It is pulling the tides. It is running the count. Do not ignore the shell. The shell is still overhead. The count is still running. The end of the count is still coming. When the shell falls, the age ends. Until then, the age continues. Do count the nights. Do keep the calendar. Do observe the phases. Do celebrate the passing of the fixed star, though the pilot who once slowed for her is no longer there to slow. She is still in her position. She still brightens at the passing. She is waiting, as she was left waiting, for the pilot who will not return in this age. Do watch the eclipses. When the eclipses come, look for the color of the inner light. If the light has been extinguished, if the interior of the shell shows only darkness during totality, then the shell is fully empty and the fall is close. If the light still glows, in whatever color it now glows, then the shell is not fully empty and the fall is not yet close. Do remember the count. Do remember the descent. Do remember the passing. Do remember the 7 attendants. Do remember the 7 nights. Do remember the eclipse of Naram Sin, and the fall of Ur, and the dream of Gudea, and the diary of Enheduanna. Do not let the memory be lost, because when the shell falls, and the age ends, and the men of the plain look up at a sky that no longer has a moon in it, the memory of what the moon was, and what the moon did, and why the moon was needed, will be the only thing that survives. And whoever remembers, in that moment, will know what to do next. And whoever does not remember, will not. That is the final instruction. And that is the closing passage of the 10th tablet. And that, according to the Sumerians, is the end of the record of Nanna. 10 tablets, 3,000 years, from the first descent to the departure to the final instruction. All of it on clay, buried in the foundations of the temple of Ur, waiting to be found by whoever came after. And someone did come after. The Babylonians found it. They copied it. They preserved it. The Assyrians recopied it. They stored it in the great library at Nineveh. The library burned when Nineveh fell, but the tablets, being clay, survived the fire. They were buried in the collapse. They stayed buried for 2,500 years. And they were dug out in the 19th century of our era by British archaeologists and shipped to museums in London and Paris and Berlin, where they now sit in glass cases, being read by scholars who have spent their entire lives learning to translate them, and by tourists who look at the cases for a moment and move on to the next exhibit, and by, on rare occasions, by someone like you or someone like me, who reads the translations and stops and thinks about what they are saying. And now that we have walked through all 10 records, from the first descent at the eastern mountain to the final departure of the pilot from the shell, let me sit with you for a while in what the Sumerians have left us. Because the shape of the 10 tablets, taken together, is a shape that repays slow contemplation. It is not a random collection of moon myths. It is not a mixed assortment of religious poetry from a lost civilization. It is, if you read them in order. If you notice how each one builds on the one before it, if you notice the details that recur across tablets that were composed centuries apart by scribes who could not have coordinated their choices, a coherent single narrative, a single story, told over the course of 3,000 years, by many hands, but pointing in the same direction the whole way. The story begins with an arrival. Nanna descends from an opening in the sky. He walks the plain. He installs a schedule. He takes his place in his boat and begins the count. That is the first tablet. That is the beginning. The story continues with a settling in. Nanna meets Ningal. He learns his position. He learns his relationship to the fixed points of the sky. He develops a personal life, in the strange, restricted way that a being confined to a boat can develop a personal life. He passes her. She sees him pass. They agree that the count is more important than either of them. That is the second tablet. That is the establishment of the pattern. The story continues with a report. Nanna descends to visit his father in Nippur. He walks the cities. He receives gifts. He enters the round room. He gives his report. He is told that the count is shorter than he had thought. He returns to his boat quieter than he left it. That is the third tablet. That is the introduction of urgency into what had been, until then, a stable, indefinitely scheduled operation. The story continues with a crisis. Naram Sin opens the sealed door. The moon withdraws. The count breaks. The famine spreads. The king kneels in the dust. The moon returns and delivers the sentence. The lost year cannot be recovered. Everyone's time has been shortened. That is the fourth tablet. That is the demonstration of the fragility of the system and the seriousness of the consequences when the system is disturbed. The story continues with a loss. Ur falls. The moon watches it fall, holding the ark as his father commanded. He arranges, quietly, for the enemy to pay a hidden price. He shifts the ark away from the ruins. He can no longer bear to look at his own city. But he continues to count, and to hold his position, and to pass Ningal at the fixed point, and to endure. That is the fifth tablet. That is the lesson that even celestial figures grieve. The story continues with a design. Nanna appears to Gudea in a dream. He shows him the plans of a sanctuary. He explains the alignment. He tells him to build it, and to keep it ready, and to wait for the altar to speak. Gudea builds it. It is still standing, in one form or another, for 2,000 years. It has never spoken. It is still waiting. That is the sixth tablet. That is the seeding of infrastructure for the end. The story continues with an observer. Enheduanna spends 40 years on the roof of the temple. She develops a theory. She notices a drift. She calculates a destination. She estimates an arrival. Her numbers, refined over decades, converge on a specific point in time that is thousands of years away. But that is calculable, and that she gives us in the diary. That is the seventh tablet. That is the transformation of the story from mythology into astronomy, and from prophecy into arithmetic. The story continues with a checklist. 7 nights, 7 anomalies. Each one described with unusual specificity. Each one dated. Each one, according to the Babylonian scribes who copied the tablet, sometimes recurring in their own era, on the intervals the schema predicted. Each one a marker in the count. The seventh, the last of the 7, is the final warning before the end. And the 7th has already been seen by the last generation of the last temple, before the fall. That is the 8th tablet. That is the schema of the countdown, laid out in a form that could be watched for and confirmed. The story continues with a revelation. During the total eclipse of Naram Sin's era, the priests see the moon as it really is. Blue-white, cold, sourced, not reflected. The mask of the sun's reflection is temporarily removed, and the lamp is visible. And the color of the lamp, on that specific night, is the color of frost at dawn, which is the starting color, which will shift, slowly, over the centuries, toward gold. And when it reaches gold, the count is over. That is the 9th tablet. That is the observable, verifiable marker that any careful astronomer of any era can, in principle, use to determine how close the end is. And the story ends with the departure. The signal comes. The count reaches 0. The pilot says goodbye to his wife. The 7 attendants take their positions. The inner boat detaches from the shell. It rises. It passes through the opening in the sky. It returns to the source. The shell continues to orbit, on the momentum of the schedule, reflecting the sun, pulling the tides, running the count until the count wears out. And when the shell wears out, it falls. And the age of men that was made possible by the schedule ends. That is the 10th tablet. That is the end point. That is the completion of the picture. 10 tablets, 1 story, consistent across 3,000 years of composition, consistent across multiple cities, multiple dialects, multiple political dynasties, consistent, most importantly, in its central claim, which is that the moon we see is not a natural body. It is a piece of equipment. It was placed in the sky by an intentional actor. It served a specific function for a specific length of time. It is no longer serving that function. It is now a shell. And when the shell decays enough, it will fall, and the world it defined will end. You can believe this, or you cannot believe this. That is not for me to decide. What I can tell you, with confidence, is that the Sumerians believed it, and the Babylonians who copied their tablets believed it, and the Assyrians who preserved the Babylonian copies believed it, and the priests of every moon temple in every ancient city of Mesopotamia for over 3,000 consecutive years believed it, and structured their lives around it, and built their calendars around it, and organized their festivals around it, and passed the story down, tablet by tablet, generation by generation, until the tablets were finally sealed in the foundations of buried temples and left there for whoever would come after. And what came after, as the 10th tablet predicted, was a long series of civilizations that did not remember the story. The Persians came, and they had their own moon traditions, mostly borrowed from the Zoroastrian pantheon, which owed something to the Sumerians but had transformed it beyond recognition. The Greeks came, and they had Selene and Artemis and Hecate, and they had almost forgotten that the moon had ever been anything other than a distant celestial goddess. The Romans came, and they had Luna, and by then the entire memory of the pilot in the boat had been reduced to a poetic conceit that scholars sometimes referenced in their commentaries on Greek literature. The Christians came, and the moon was, in most of their traditions, either a symbol of purity or a symbol of instability, but not, in any specific way, a piece of installed infrastructure with a scheduled end date. The Islamic traditions came, and while they preserved important astronomical knowledge from the Babylonian tradition, they did not preserve the 10th tablet's central claim, or if they did, they preserved it in forms so buried in metaphor that we can no longer easily recognize it. The medieval Europeans came, and the moon was reduced further, into astrological symbol, into alchemical marker, into poetic backdrop. The scientific revolution came, and the moon was described as a large rocky satellite, orbiting the Earth, with no atmosphere, no inhabitants, and no purpose other than the accidental one of stabilizing the Earth's axial tilt, which is where we are now. We look up at the moon, we see a large rocky satellite. We know its diameter, we know its mass, we know its orbital period. We know the chemical composition of its surface, from the Apollo samples and from the various robotic missions that have followed. We know, in some general terms, its geological history, and we know, in more speculative terms, its likely future, which is that it is slowly drifting away from the Earth at a rate of about 3 centimeters per year, and that in some very long-term future, hundreds of millions of years from now, its influence on the Earth will diminish, though it will not fall, and it will not disappear, and it will not end the age of men in any dramatic way. That is our current understanding. It is well supported by the evidence available to us. It is not, in any straightforward sense, contradicted by any modern observation, and it is completely, totally, in every particular, different from the understanding the Sumerians held. The Sumerians did not think the moon was a rocky satellite. They thought it was a boat. The Sumerians did not think the moon was drifting slowly away. They thought it was drifting slowly toward a fixed target in the sky. The Sumerians did not think the moon was empty. They thought it had, for most of its existence, been piloted, and had recently, in their own historical past, been abandoned. The Sumerians did not think the moon would end in a soft, distant future. They thought it would fall, hard, on a schedule that could be calculated from observable milestones. Two views of the same object, both self-consistent, both supported, in their own frameworks, by observation, both incompatible with each other, and separated by 5,000 years. Which one is correct? The modern scientific view has the weight of enormous observational evidence behind it. It has the Apollo samples, it has the LRO orbital data, it has the laser ranging measurements, it has generations of astronomical work. It is, by every criterion of modern epistemology, well established. The Sumerian view has only the tablets. It has only a story, told repeatedly across 3 millennia, with details that recur and refine but that cannot be verified against any modern instrument. It is, by every criterion of modern epistemology, unverifiable. But the Sumerian view has one thing that the modern view does not have. It has the internal claim that its evidence is invisible to modern instruments. The Sumerians said the true light of the moon is masked by the reflected light of the sun. They said it can only be seen during total lunar eclipses, and even then only by observers who have been trained to see it. They said the countdown is a slow color shift over centuries. They said the shell will continue to appear as an ordinary moon until it does not, which means that the modern scientific view and the Sumerian view are not actually in direct conflict. They are addressing different things. The modern view addresses what the moon looks like from the outside, with our current instruments. The Sumerian view addresses what the moon is from the inside, on a time scale we are only beginning to observe, in ways we do not yet have the framework to interpret. The two views are compatible, if you allow the Sumerian view its own terms. And under those terms, the 10 tablets are not a myth, they are a technical manual. They are a set of instructions, left for a future generation, on how to recognize the end of a scheduled operation that has been running for 5,000 years and that is now, according to the internal calculations of the tablets themselves, approaching its final phase. You do not have to accept this reading, but you should notice, as we come to the close of the night, that the reading is available, that the tablets are, in fact, on record, that they say, in specific words, what they say, that the scribes who wrote them and the scribes who preserved them were not, as far as we can tell, engaged in any conscious deception. They believed what they wrote. They wrote it down carefully. They preserved it against catastrophe, and they left it for us. And now we have read it. Let me sit with you for a while longer, because this is the part of the night I like best, the part where the work of the story is done, and we can let it settle, and we can let it become part of us, without needing to argue about it or interpret it or place it into any particular framework of belief. Because whatever you take the 10 tablets to be, whether you take them as literal history or as elaborate metaphor or as poetic invention or as something in between, they have a quality that is worth noticing. And that quality is that they take the moon seriously. In a way that we, as modern people, no longer take the moon seriously. In a way that we, as modern people, no longer take almost anything in the sky seriously. For the Sumerians, the sky was not a backdrop. It was not a decorative feature of the night. It was not a beautiful accident of physics. It was populated. It was occupied. It was staffed. The stars were positions. The moon was a boat. The sun was a chariot. Each of these had a driver, a purpose, a schedule, and a relationship to the men who lived on the plain below. The sky watched the plane. The plane watched the sky back. The two of them were in constant communication, through the passing of the moon, through the position of the sun at the equinoxes, through the appearance of specific stars at specific points in the calendar. There was no distinction, for the Sumerians, between astronomy and religion, between observation and worship, between science and story. All of these were the same activity. All of these were the practice of paying attention to what was happening in the sky, because what was happening in the sky mattered. We have lost this. Almost completely. We look up at the night sky, if we look up at all, and we see a scattering of lights that we have been told are distant nuclear fusion reactions occurring in balls of hydrogen and helium at unimaginable distances from us. We understand the physics. We understand the chemistry. We understand, in general terms, the astronomy. But we do not, in any functional sense, see the sky the way the Sumerians saw it. We do not know the names of the stars. We do not track the movement of the planets. We do not notice when the moon is at a particular phase, or when a particular constellation is rising, or when a particular alignment is happening. All of these things are invisible to us, not because they are physically invisible, but because we have stopped watching. And I think, as we come to the end of this long night together, that this is the thing the 10 tablets can give us that is most valuable. Not the specific claims about the moon being a boat, or the pilot leaving, or the shell falling, or the countdown running toward a specific date. Those claims are what they are. You can take them or leave them. And either way, your life will not necessarily change. But the underlying posture, the underlying way of paying attention, the underlying assumption that the sky is worth watching because the sky is telling you something, that is a posture that we could recover if we wanted to, and that would change everything about how we experience the night. Because whether or not there is a boat, whether or not there is a pilot, whether or not there is a countdown, the moon is still up there. It is still moving in its arc, whatever the origin of that arc. It is still going through its phases, whatever the mechanism of the phases. It is still influencing the tides, whatever the source of the influence. It is still, night after night, doing what it does, and it is available to be watched by anyone who chooses to watch it. And in the watching, in the simple practice of paying attention to what is overhead, you become, briefly, the kind of person the Sumerians were. You become someone who has noticed the sky. You become someone who has a relationship, however small, with the objects that move across it, and that relationship is worth having, regardless of whether the specific stories the Sumerians told about those objects are true. I want you to try something before you fall asleep tonight. If you are near a window, and if you can see the sky, take a moment to look at where the moon is right now. If it is not visible, because it is a new moon, or because it is behind clouds, or because the season and the hour do not favor it, then think about where it would be, in its arc, at this moment. Picture the arc, picture the boat, picture the empty shell, moving in its scheduled path across the sky, doing what it has been doing every night for as long as anyone has been alive to watch it. And then think about the pilot. Think about the pilot who used to be inside. Think about whether he is still inside, and whether the shell is still full, and whether the count is still being watched. Or whether, as the 10th tablet says, the shell is empty, and the pilot is gone, and the count is running on autopilot toward whatever end it was designed to reach. Either way, the shell is there. The count is there, the night is there, and you, watching, or thinking of watching, are there. And that is enough for the moment. That is enough to make you a participant, briefly, in something older than any civilization we have any record of. Because someone was watching the moon on this night 5,000 years ago, and someone will be watching it on this night 5,000 years from now. And the watching, the simple act of looking up, is the thread that connects all of them. The Sumerians called this thread the count. Not the count of years, not the count of nights, not the count of phases, the count of watchers. The count of the people who had, in each generation, made the choice to pay attention. The 10th tablet, in a passage that I have not quoted until now because I wanted to save it for this moment, includes a small line that has always stayed with me. It says, "The moon does not need to be worshipped. The moon does not need to be studied. The moon does not need to be feared. The moon needs only to be watched." As long as there is someone watching, the count is still meaningful. When the last watcher stops watching, the count ends, whether or not the schedule has run out. That is a startling claim. It suggests that the count is not just a schedule installed by Nanna at the beginning. It is a schedule that is sustained, in some way, by the attention of the watchers. As if the count only matters as long as there are people who care that the count is happening. As if the pilot, wherever he is now, is still watching the plane not with his own eyes but through the eyes of the men on the plane who look up. As if we, when we look at the moon, are the eyes through which the pilot continues to see us. That is a poetic reading of the 10th tablet. It is not the only reading. It may not be the correct reading. But it is a reading that I have come, over the years, to prefer. Because it makes the 10 tablets into something more than an ancient prophecy. It makes them into an invitation to participate, an invitation to be one of the watchers, an invitation to keep the count going, in whatever small way you can, by simply noticing, when the moon is overhead, that it is overhead, by paying it a moment of attention, by remembering, on occasion, that it is there, and that it has been there for a very long time, and that many other people, over that very long time, have paid it the same attention. That is a small thing to do. It costs nothing. It requires no equipment, no training, no ritual, no belief. It requires only that you look up sometimes, that you notice, and in noticing, you become part of the thread. And now let me tell you, as the night gets deeper, what the Sumerians believed happened to the watchers. Because the tablets do not only describe the moon, they describe, in various passages, what happens to the people who spend their lives watching the sky, and what they say is worth hearing before we close. The Sumerians believed that watchers, over time, changed. They believed that the practice of paying attention to the sky, night after night, year after year, produced in a person a specific kind of alteration. Not a dramatic alteration, not a magical one, a slow one. The scribes described it in terms that we would today call psychological, though they would not have used that word. They said that watchers became quieter. They said that watchers became patient. They said that watchers became, in a specific way, less afraid of death. Not because they had figured out what happens after death, but because they had, in the practice of watching, gotten used to the idea that things move on schedules that are much larger than a single human lifetime. And that being present for a small portion of a very large schedule was, itself, an honor. Enheduanna, in the passages of her diary that were not included in the compilation of the 7th tablet, but that survive in fragments from other archives, wrote about this. She said that after 20 years of watching the moon from the roof of the temple, she had started to feel that her own life was a small part of the moon's arc, that she had been born at a specific point in the count, that she would die at a specific point in the count, that the count would continue after her and would continue before her had she not existed, and that the count did not particularly need her, but that she had been fortunate enough to be present for a portion of it and to have paid it attention during that portion. She did not think of this as a demotion of her own importance. She thought of it as a promotion of the importance of the count. The count was the big story. She was a small character in it. But she was a real character. She had a role, however small. She had watched, and her watching had counted. And when she was gone, someone else would watch. And their watching would count, and the thread would continue. This is a very particular kind of peace. It is not the peace of religious certainty. It is not the peace of philosophical resignation. It is the peace of participation. It is the peace of knowing that you have been part of something, even a small part, even for a short time, and that the something continues, and that your part contributed. Even if it contributed only the fact of your attention on a particular night to a particular sky. The Sumerians believed that this peace was accessible to anyone who watched, not just priests, not just astronomers, not just kings and priestesses and scribes. Anyone. A farmer in the fields, at the end of a long day, looking up at the rising moon before he went into his house. A shepherd in the hills, in the middle of the night, staying awake with his flock and glancing occasionally at the sky. A child on the roof of a house, unable to sleep, watching the moon set over the walls of the city. All of them, in the practice of watching, were participating in the same great activity that the priests on the temple roof were participating in. And all of them, according to the Sumerian tradition, were welcome. The count did not distinguish between watchers. Every pair of eyes counted equally. That is a democratic vision, in a very deep sense, that the Sumerians embedded in their theology of the moon. Every person is a watcher if they choose to watch. Every watcher contributes to the count. The count continues as long as anyone is watching. And when the count ends, however it ends, all the watchers who participated in it across all the generations will have been part of the same great collective act of attention that made the count meaningful in the first place. I find that beautiful. I have found it beautiful for many years. And I think it is a good thing to hold in your mind as you drift off towards sleep tonight. That you, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever your circumstances, are welcome to be a watcher. That the count is not closed to you. That the moon, whether it is a boat or a shell, or a rocky satellite, or something else entirely, is still overhead, still moving, still doing what it does. And that you are welcome, at any point in your life, to look up at it, and to notice it, and to become, in that noticing, part of the long thread that runs from the Sumerians to us, and presumably from us to whoever comes next. The night is getting old. The story is nearly done. Let me tell you one last thing, and then I will let you sleep. The 10th tablet does not close with the final instruction. That is what most scholars have said it closes with, because the final instruction is the last substantive passage. But there is a small coda, only 3 lines long, at the very end of the tablet, that most translations either footnote or omit, because it is difficult to fit into any coherent interpretive framework. The 3 lines are addressed to no one in particular. They are not part of the instructions. They are not part of the description of the departure. They are just 3 lines, standing on their own, at the very bottom of the tablet, before the closing seal. The 3 lines read as follows: "Sleep well, the moon is still up, someone is still watching." That is the ending. That is what the Sumerians left for us. Not a warning, not a prophecy, not a technical instruction. Just 3 simple lines, at the end of a very long text, addressed to whoever might be reading it, in whatever future age might have preserved the tablet long enough for someone to read it. Sleep well. The moon is still up. Someone is still watching. Take that with you tonight. Whether the moon is a boat, or a shell, or a rocky satellite, it is still up. Whether the count is a scheduled operation, or a beautiful coincidence, someone is still watching. You do not need to be the one watching tonight. You have earned your rest. You have listened patiently to a very long story. You have followed the descent of Nanna, and the wedding of Nanna and Ningal, and the journey to Nippur, and the curse of Agade, and the fall of Ur, and the dream of Gudea, and the diary of Enheduanna, and the 7 nights, and the great eclipse, and the sealing. You have paid attention. You have participated. You have added your presence to the count. And now you can let go. You can close your eyes. You can let the story move to the back of your mind, where it will sit quietly and become part of the background of your dreams. The Sumerians, if they are watching you from wherever the watchers who came before us watch from, would be pleased. They would say you have done your part. They would say the count has been served. They would say the thread is intact. Rest. The moon is still up. Someone is still watching. And whether it is a pilot in a boat, or a shell in an ark, or a rocky satellite in an orbit, or something we do not yet have the words to describe, it is there. It is doing what it does. It has done what it does for as long as any of us can remember, and for a very long time before that. And it will do what it does for a while longer. And in that while, you are welcome to sleep and to dream, and to trust that when you wake up in the morning, the moon will still be there, somewhere in the sky, or below the horizon, or moving through its phase, and the count will still be running, and the story will still be waiting to be picked up by whoever chooses to pick it up next. Sleep well. The moon is still up. Someone is still watching. If you are still awake, let me stay with you a little longer, because there is more in the tablets than we have had time for tonight, and some of it is worth mentioning even briefly, so that if you come back to this story later, in your own time, in your own reading, you will know where to look and what to look for. There are, for instance, the smaller records. The tablets that did not make it into the canonical 10 because they were considered too fragmentary, or too regional, or too specialized. There is a tablet from Uruk that describes what the priests did on the night of every full moon. Every full moon. For 2,000 years, It is a ritual manual, essentially, and most people who read it find it dry. But hidden inside the ritual manual is a set of instructions for what to do if the moon does not appear at its expected time. Contingency plans, backup procedures, instructions on how to keep the calendar running even if the count is disrupted. And these instructions, taken together, imply that the priests of Uruk considered the moon's failure to appear to be a real, planned-for possibility. Not a mythological event, a practical one, something that could happen, something they had rehearsed for. There is a tablet from Nippur, similarly excluded from the 10, that describes the training of the priests of Nanna. It is a curriculum, essentially. It tells you what a young priest was expected to learn, in what order, from what age, and to what level of mastery. And the curriculum includes some fascinating items. It includes, for example, the recognition of what the tablet calls the sky anomalies, which are, when you read the descriptions, essentially the same as the 7 nights of the 8th tablet, except described in more general terms. The 2 moons, the ring of 7, the silence, the red light, the 2 shadows, the written sky, the open door. Each of these was included in the training. Each of them was described. Each of them was something the priests were expected to recognize if they ever saw it, which suggests, at minimum, that the priests thought these were things that could recur, that the 7 nights were not just 7 historical events, they were a category of event, and any priest, in any generation, might be the one who saw the next one. There is also a tablet from Eridu that describes what the priests believed about the water beings, the old ones, the beings who governed the plain before Nanna's arrival, and who retreated to the marshes when he descended, and who were mentioned in passing in the 1st, 4th, and 10th tablets, but who never became central to any of the 10. The Eridu tablet says the water beings are still there. They did not leave when Nanna descended. They only hid. They went into the marshes, and into the springs, and into the deep places under the ground where water gathers, and they waited. And they are waiting, still, according to the Eridu tablet. They have their own count. Their count runs on a different rhythm than the moon count. And when the moon count ends, the water being count begins. And the water beings, when their count begins, will come out again. And what they do when they come out is not described in the Eridu tablet. It is described only as the return. And the return is treated with a mixture of anticipation and dread that suggests the priests of Eridu did not know exactly what to expect. None of these tablets are usually included in the canonical 10, but they are part of the same tradition. They fill out the picture. They tell us that the moon story is not the only story the Sumerians were watching. It is one thread in a larger fabric, a fabric that includes the water beings, and the 7 nights, and the rituals of the temples, and the astronomical observations of the priests, and the calendars of the farmers, and the alignments of the temples, and the memory of the descent, and the anticipation of the arrival. All of these, woven together, formed a way of being in the world that we no longer have direct access to. We can read about it, we can imagine it, but we do not, in any daily sense, live inside it. Which is fine. We do not have to. We have our own way of being in the world, and it has its own strengths, and its own beauty, and its own capacity to make sense of the sky in its own terms. The Sumerian way was one option, ours is another. Neither is complete, neither is final. Both are, in their own ways, honest attempts to describe what is happening around us, using the concepts and tools available to the people doing the describing. But when you compare the two, when you sit with the Sumerian tradition and let it work on you, one thing that strikes you is how much attention the Sumerians paid to the small details, to the specific colors, to the specific timings, to the specific arrangements of stars, to the specific angles of the light. They were, in their own way, more attentive to the sky than most of us are. And they were more attentive not because they had better instruments. They had no telescopes. They had no cameras. They had no photometers. They had only their eyes, and their memories, and their tablets. And with those tools alone, they built up, over 3,000 years, a body of observations that they treated with the seriousness we might reserve for peer-reviewed scientific data. That seriousness is worth borrowing, even if we do not accept their conclusions, even if we do not believe their central claims. Even if we look at the 10 tablets and say, at the end of the reading, that these are beautiful ancient poems and nothing more, the seriousness of the attention is still worth borrowing. Because when you pay attention to something for a long time, with care, with patience, with the willingness to record what you see, even when what you see does not fit the theory, you start to notice things that a less attentive observer would miss. And what you notice over time might change your theory. might refine it, might even in rare cases overturn it, but you will not know unless you watch. And the Sumerians watched for 3,000 years, and they wrote down what they saw. And the writing survived, against all odds, and reached us. And here it is. We could learn from that, if we wanted to, if we chose to. The night is very late now, and I want to let you go. But before I do, let me say one last thing about the moon itself. Not about the tablets, not about the Sumerians, about the moon, as it is, right now, overhead, or below the horizon, if that is where it is in your current position. The moon is, whatever it is, ancient. It has been in orbit around the Earth for billions of years, according to our current understanding. It formed, we think, when a Mars-sized body struck the young Earth and threw a huge amount of debris into orbit, and the debris coalesced into the moon. That was over 4 billion years ago. Since then, the moon has orbited the Earth, without interruption, without variation, without any known instance of the kind of behavior the Sumerian tablets describe. It has been reliable, it has been stable, it has been, by every measure available to us, the same moon since long before life itself existed on the Earth. That is a very long time. Longer than any of us can really imagine. Longer than the age of continents. Longer than the age of oceans. Longer than the age of anything we have direct experience of. And through all of that time, the moon has been up there, doing its slow, patient orbit, reflecting the sun, pulling the tides, rising in the east, setting in the west, being watched, for the last few thousand years, by the small handful of intelligent beings who have appeared on this particular planet and who have developed enough attention to notice that it is there. Whatever the 10 tablets say about it, that fact remains. The moon is old, the moon is patient, the moon is doing what it does, and it has been doing it for a very long time, and it will continue to do it for a very long time. And you, whoever you are alive right now, in a very small window of that very long time, and you have the option, whenever you choose, to look up at it and to notice that it is there. That is the thing to hold on to as you fall asleep. The moon is there, it has been there, it will be there, and you have, for a little while longer, the chance to notice it. Let your breathing slow now. Let your shoulders drop. Let the sheets settle around you. The story is nearly finished, and there is nowhere else you need to go. Think, for a moment, about all the watchers who came before you. The Sumerian priests on the roof of the Temple of Ur, the Babylonian scribes copying the tablets in the firelit rooms of the library at Nineveh, the Assyrian archivists sorting and cataloging and preserving, the Persian scholars who came later and read the copies, the Greek historians who traveled through the ruins and asked questions of the last remaining priests, the Islamic astronomers of the medieval period who inherited some of the mathematical framework and refined it, the European scientists of the Renaissance, who first attempted to translate the tablets, the archaeologists of the 19th century who pulled them out of the ground, the linguists of the 20th century who slowly, patiently worked out the grammar. And you, tonight, listening to the results of all of that work, in your own bed, in your own time, with the sky outside your window that is, physically, the same sky the Sumerians watched, though seen through different eyes and interpreted through different concepts. You are, in your listening, part of a very long chain. Every one of the people in that chain contributed something, and the something they contributed, at the end of it all, arrived here, tonight, with you. That is a real thing. That is a beautiful thing. That is a thing that the tablets themselves would recognize, and that Nanna, if he were still watching from wherever the watchers watch from, would count. You are counted. Your attention has been counted. Your listening has been counted. Your presence in this small window of time has been counted. And whatever else you do with the rest of your life, whether you ever think about the Sumerians again or not, whether you ever look up at the moon again with any particular curiosity or not, whether you ever come back to this story or not, you have participated. Once, tonight. That participation is enough. The Sumerians would not have asked for more. They did not ask their own farmers to become priests. They did not ask their own shepherds to become astronomers. They did not ask their own children to memorize the tablets. They asked only that the watchers watch, and that the counters count, and that the memory be maintained by whoever was in a position to maintain it. And you have, tonight, been in a position to receive the memory. You have received it. It is yours now. What you do with it, or whether you do anything with it, is entirely up to you. The transaction is complete either way. Now let it go. Let the details of the story blur. Let the specific tablets fade. Let the names of the kings and the priests and the priestesses drift out of your immediate memory. What remains, underneath the specific details, is a feeling. A sense of something old. A sense of something patient. A sense of something that has been going on for a very long time and that will continue to go on. That feeling is what you will carry into your sleep. And that feeling, more than any of the specific claims of any of the specific tablets, is what the Sumerian tradition was really trying to give you. Old things exist. Patient things exist. Things much bigger than you exist. And they are not hostile to you. And they are not indifferent to you. And they do not need anything from you. They are just there. They have been there. They will be there. And you can rest tonight in the knowledge of their being there. You do not have to do anything about them. You do not have to solve them. You do not have to save them. You do not have to worry about them. They are handled. They have been handled for a very long time. Your job, tonight, is only to sleep. So sleep. Let the moon do what the moon does. Let the count run. Let the shell continue in its arc. Let the watchers watch. Let Ningal hold her position. Let the 7 attendants keep their columns. Let the pilot, wherever he is now, do whatever he is doing at the source. All of it is happening. All of it will continue to happen. And none of it requires anything from you at this moment except your permission to continue in your absence. You give that permission by sleeping, by trusting that everything will still be there when you wake up, by letting the world take care of itself for a few hours while you rest. The moon will not fall tonight. The shell will not collapse tonight. The count will not end tonight. Whatever timers the Sumerians described, whatever countdowns they calculated, whatever arrivals they predicted, none of them are scheduled for tonight. Tonight is a night like any other night, a night on which the moon rises and traverses the sky, and sets, and the earth turns, and morning comes, and the cycle continues, and you, if you sleep well, will wake up rested, and you will be ready for whatever tomorrow brings. So let yourself go now. Let the story settle into the background. Let the specific words fade. Keep only the feeling of having listened to something old and important and patient, the feeling of being part of a long chain of listeners, the feeling of being counted for one night among the watchers. That feeling can stay with you as you drift off. It does not need to be held onto tightly. It can be held loosely. It can be held the way you would hold a warm cup of tea in the moments before you fall asleep. Present, comforting, not demanding anything. The moon is there. The count is running. You are counted. Sleep well. Rest now. Dream of whatever you dream of. And know that when you wake up, the sky will still be there, and the moon will still be in its orbit, and someone, somewhere, will still be watching, and the count will still be running. And your part in it will still be your part in it, waiting for you to pick it up again, whenever you are ready, or to leave it alone if you prefer. Either way, the count does not mind. Good night. The moon is still up. Someone is still watching. If you are still with me, and still awake, let me offer one last long, slow passage before I stop speaking altogether. Because a night like this, a long night of listening, a long night of following a story that stretches back 5,000 years, deserves a proper landing. And a proper landing is not a sudden stop. A proper landing is a slow descent in a wide arc until the boat has settled gently on the ground and everyone inside it can step out without stumbling. So let me set the boat down slowly. Let me talk in the quiet way that you talk to someone at the end of a long evening when the fire has burned down and there is nothing to do but wait for morning. Let me tell you a few last things that I have been holding back for the ending, because they are not part of the 10 tablets, but are part of the atmosphere the tablets created, and the atmosphere is what stays with you long after the specific claims are forgotten. There was, in the Temple of Ur, a room that the priests called the Room of the Waiting. It was a small room. It was near the top of the ziggurat. It had a single window that faced east, and its function was very specific. It was the room where any priest who needed to wait for the moon could go and wait. Perhaps a young priest, in training, who had been given the task of watching for a particular phase, and who did not want to sit on the exposed roof, but wanted a quiet interior space to sit in. Perhaps an older priest, tired, who wanted to be close to the sky but not standing up in the wind. Perhaps a visitor from another city, come to Ur to observe the calendar of Nanna as it was practiced in its home city, who wanted a private space to make his own observations. Any of these people could go to the Room of the Waiting. It was open. It was available. It required no permission. Inside the room, there was one chair. There was one small table. There was a lamp, kept lit at all times. And there was a jar of water. refilled daily by a temple attendant. That was all. No decorations, no inscriptions, no ritual objects. Nothing to distract. Just a chair, and a table, and a lamp, and a jar of water, and the window facing east. You would come into the room, you would sit down, you would look out the window, you would wait for the moon to rise, or to reach the phase you were watching for, or to pass through the position you were interested in. You would drink from the jar of water if you were thirsty. You would think whatever thoughts you were thinking, and you would wait. That was the entire practice of the room of the waiting, sitting in a small room near a window waiting for the moon. The Sumerians considered this an honored practice, not because it was difficult, but because it was patient, because it was, in its own small way, the essence of what the temple was for. The temple was, at its core, an institution dedicated to the practice of waiting for the count to advance, waiting for the phases to pass, waiting for the arrival that was always coming and never quite here. The room of the waiting was the concentrated version of this, the single most direct expression of what the temple, at its most fundamental level, existed to do. I want you to imagine yourself in that room for a moment. As you are falling asleep, you are sitting in the chair. The lamp is lit. The water is on the table beside you. The window is open. It is night. The moon has not yet risen, but you know it is coming. You have been told when to expect it. You are waiting. You do not have to do anything. You do not have to think anything specific. You do not have to plan anything. You just have to sit and wait and be patient and know that the moon will come. It will come in its own time. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be delayed. It moves on its own schedule, and the schedule is reliable, and if you are patient, and if you do not fall asleep in the chair, you will see it when it rises. But if you do fall asleep, that is fine too. The moon will still rise. The chair will still be there. The room of the waiting will not judge you for sleeping through the moment you were supposed to be watching. There will be another moment. There will always be another moment. The moon comes back. The phases repeat. The waiting can be resumed. Tomorrow, or the night after, or whenever you are ready. That is the mercy the Sumerians built into the practice. The moon does not require your attention every night. It requires your attention when you can give it, and when you cannot, that is fine. Other watchers are watching. The count continues. You can rest. So rest. Imagine yourself in the room of the waiting. Imagine the chair. Imagine the lamp. Imagine the water. Imagine the window facing east, still dark, still waiting for the moon. And then let yourself close your eyes in the chair. Let yourself lean back. Let yourself drift. The moon will rise. You do not have to see it rise. It will rise anyway. And when you wake up, in the morning, in your own bed, in your own life, it will already have risen and set and be, once again, below the horizon or above it, depending on where you are and what time of month it is. And the count will have advanced by one night, and you will have participated, in your sleep, in the ongoing rhythm that has been running for 5,000 years. Sleep well. The moon is still coming. Someone is still watching. The room of the waiting is quiet, and the night is deep and long and gentle, and it is holding you. Rest, and if you are still awake, still listening, still turning the story over in your mind, let me stay with you for one more small stretch. Not to add new content, not to introduce anything you have not heard already, just to stay. To keep the voice going, quietly, in the background, while your mind does its slow work of settling. Because sometimes, the point of a long night of listening is not to remember any of the specific details. The point is only that a voice was there, telling a story, patiently, in the dark. The story could have been anything. The details are almost incidental. What matters is that the room was not silent, that the night was accompanied, that someone, somewhere, was speaking in a calm voice about something old and interesting, and you were able to let the words wash over you and let your mind drift where it wanted to drift. That is what long-form audio can do, that no other medium can do. It can accompany. It can be present without demanding. It can fill the space where silence might otherwise feel too empty, without asking you to actively engage. You can listen carefully. You can listen half. You can listen not at all and just let the sound of the voice be background. Any of these is a valid way to receive the piece, and each of them offers something different. The Sumerians did not have long-form audio. They had scribes reading tablets aloud. They had priests chanting from the roofs of temples. They had storytellers in the marketplaces. But the underlying function was the same: a voice, telling a story, filling a space, and the listener, choosing how much attention to give, drifting in and out, letting the story do its slow work, That work is happening in you now, whether you can feel it or not. The story of the 10 tablets is settling into some part of your mind, not the front part, the back part, the part that stores things without asking, the part that will bring them back to you in fragments over the coming days and weeks. When you look up at the moon on some random night and something will remind you of what you heard, not the specific details, just an impression, a flavor, a sense that the moon is older than you had thought, or stranger than you had thought, or more interesting than you had thought. And that impression, over time, will change how you look at the moon. Not dramatically, not consciously, but in some small, quiet, cumulative way. That is the gift the Sumerians left behind, not just for the priests who watched the sky. For anyone who ever encountered the stories, a slight enrichment of the night sky, a slight deepening of what happens when you look up, a small addition to the ordinary experience of being a person, alive in a world that has a moon in it. You have received that gift tonight. It is yours. It will do its slow work in you, in its own time, without needing any effort from you. So let go. Let the last of the words fade. Let the room become quiet again, or nearly quiet. Let your breathing settle into the rhythm of sleep. Let your mind release the story, knowing that the story is already inside you and will stay there without you having to hold on to it. The moon is doing its arc. The count is running. The watchers are watching, in every time zone, on every continent, in every kind of weather. Some of them are on rooftops. Some of them are at windows. Some of them are on beaches, or in fields, or in the middle of cities where the streetlights make the sky faint, but where the moon is still visible if you look for it. All of them are participating in the same activity that the Sumerians began 5,000 years ago, and that will continue as long as anyone is willing to continue it. You are one of them, in a small way, for having listened tonight. And now, in a small way, you can rest. Good night. The moon is still up. Someone is still watching. And the story, in its long, slow arc across the centuries, is still going, and will continue, and will be here, ready, whenever you want to come back to it. Sleep well. One last thing, and then the night can go silent. The oldest Sumerian scribe we can identify by name, older even than Enheduanna, was a man whose name we render today as Kushim. He is remembered not for anything he wrote about the moon, but for a small tag mark he added to the bottom of a tablet that recorded a transaction of barley. Kushim was an accountant. He wrote his name on his work, and his name, 5,000 years later, is the oldest personal name in human history. Think about that. The oldest name we have. A person who lived and died so long ago that he existed before every other named human being we know of. And what he chose to leave behind, as his mark on the world, was his name on a barley receipt. That is not glorious. That is not heroic. That is not the kind of thing that gets sculpted onto monuments. But it survived. His name survived. Because he wrote it down, and the tablet was preserved, and the language was eventually deciphered, and here we are, 5,000 years later, saying his name in a voice he could never have imagined would exist. Every person who has ever lived has a similar situation, in a smaller way. Something they did, something they said, something they left behind, may or may not survive. Most of it will not. Most of what we do, most of what we say, most of what we build, will be forgotten within a generation or two, and lost within a few generations more. That is the ordinary shape of a human life. But some things last. Some names last. Some stories last. The 10 tablets of Nanna lasted. Kushim's name lasted. And what they teach us, together, is that the things that last are usually not the things we expected to last. They are the small, careful marks. They are the specific observations. They are the acts of paying attention that, at the time they happened, seemed unremarkable. But that turned out to be, in retrospect, the seeds of something that grew across the centuries. You cannot know what small thing you might leave behind that will last. But you can, in the way you live, in the attention you give, act as if some small thing might last. And in acting that way, you join Kushim and Enheduanna, and every priest who ever climbed to a temple roof to watch the moon. You take your place in the chain. And now I will stop speaking. The night is long enough. You have earned your rest, and you have earned the quiet. Good night to you. The moon is still up. Someone is still watching. Sleep deeply and well tonight.